It was late October, and the wind had begun to whistle through the trees outside my house in northern Pennsylvania. I was 16, home alone for the weekend because my parents had gone to visit my grandparents in another state. My older brother, Alex, had college classes, so he wouldn't be back until Sunday night. It was supposed to be a normal weekend, homework, some video games, maybe a movie marathon, but it quickly turned into something I'll never forget. The first night started like any other. I ate some leftover pizza, put on a scary movie, and tried not to think about being alone. My parents had reminded me to lock all doors and windows, to not answer the door for anyone, and to call them or a neighbor if anything felt off. I assured them I could handle it. Around 9 o'clock, the wind picked up outside. The trees scratched against the siding of the house, and the old wooden floors creaked under the pressure of the storm. I told myself it was normal, that old houses made noise, but there was a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach that I couldn't shake. I had just settled into the couch when I heard a faint tapping at the window behind me. I froze, straining to hear. The rain had intensified, and the tapping sounded almost like fingernails against the glass. I convinced myself it was just a branch, heavy with rain, brushing against the window. I turned back to the TV, trying to focus on the movie, but the tapping continued, now more deliberate. I swallowed hard and crept to the window, heart pounding. I pulled aside the curtain and peered out into the darkness. Nothing. The backyard was empty, shadows of trees swaying in the wind. I exhaled slowly, telling myself I was overreacting. I went upstairs to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I had my phone on hand, just in case. I called Alex to talk for a few minutes, trying to calm myself. We laughed about the movie I was watching, the storm outside, and I felt a little better. When I hung up, I set the phone on my nightstand and tried to fall asleep. Then came the sound of the basement door creaking. My blood ran cold. The basement door was at the end of a long hallway, and it had a simple latch, which I always made sure was locked. I strained my ears, listening. Footsteps? No, too soft. A dragging sound, maybe? The storm outside made it hard to tell. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed and tiptoed toward the hallway. The creaking stopped. I glanced down the hall at the basement door. It was slightly ajar. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob. I wanted to convince myself it was the house settling, that nothing could be in there, but the fear had my stomach in knots. I didn't open the door. Instead, I ran back to my room and locked it again. My phone was dead. I must have left it charging in the living room. Panic set in. I had no way to call anyone. My parents were hours away, and Alex wouldn't be back until morning. I crouched behind my bed, bat in hand, listening. Then I heard it, a soft whisper, almost a hiss, coming from the hallway. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like someone was taunting me. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to stay quiet, hoping whoever or whatever was there would leave. Minutes passed. Then, a heavy thump on the floor above me. The attic. My parents had always told me the attic was off limits, but I had a trapdoor in the closet that led to it. I hadn't gone up there in years. The thump came again, closer this time, then a dragging sound. I gripped the bat tighter, heart hammering, and waited. The whispers started again, now coming from the direction of my bedroom door. Whoever was in the house had moved closer. I felt a cold draft and realized the window next to my bed was slightly open, even though I had locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely close it. I remembered my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, who lived 2 houses down. I considered running there, but the storm had made the roads slick and the wind was howling. I was trapped. I grabbed my flashlight and crept to the door, peeking through the keyhole. Shadows moved in the hallway. Someone was there. I could hear their breathing now, slow, deliberate, almost mocking. My first instinct was to scream, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I decided to hide in the closet. I shoved the door open and slipped inside, clutching the bat. I pressed myself against the back wall, listening as the footsteps approached. The breathing stopped outside the closet, and I held my breath, willing myself to disappear. The intruder opened the closet door. A hand reached in, brushing against the door frame. I swung the bat with all my strength, connecting with a solid thud. The figure yelped and stepped back. I didn't wait. I bolted out of the closet and ran to my parents' bedroom, which was on the other side of the house. I slammed the door and locked it, sliding the dresser in front of it. I searched for my phone, finding it under the bed in a tangle of cords. I dialed 911, whispering to the operator as quietly as I could. "Someone's in my house," I said. "I'm alone. Please, hurry." The operator kept me on the line, telling me to stay put and stay quiet. The sound of the intruder moving through the house was terrifying. They weren't running. They were methodical, moving from room to room, dragging something heavy across the floor. I could hear them in the kitchen now, smashing cabinets, searching for something. My heart was in my throat. I thought of barricading myself in the bedroom, but the door was only reinforced by a dresser. I had no way to know when they would break through. Then, suddenly, everything went quiet. The sound of the storm outside seemed louder, more menacing. I clutched the bat, listening. Minutes passed. I could hear nothing. No footsteps, no whispers, no dragging, just the rain. I stayed hidden for what felt like hours, too scared to move. Finally, the sound of sirens pierced the night. The intruder must have realized the police were coming. I heard running footsteps outside and then silence again. When the officers arrived, they swept the house. They found signs of forced entry in the back door and basement, but no one was inside. Footprints led from the house into the woods behind our property. Nothing had been stolen. The intruder had entered, terrorized me, and left without taking anything. The police told me that similar incidents had happened in the area. A man had been targeting homes where people were home alone. His goal wasn't theft. It was to scare, to invade, to watch. The idea made my skin crawl. I didn't sleep at all that night. I stayed on the phone with my parents until they could drive back. When they arrived, I was shaking, exhausted, and traumatized. They installed security cameras, new locks, and an alarm system. But it didn't change the feeling I had. The memory of someone moving through my home, whispering, dragging their feet, waiting just out of sight. Even now, years later, I can't be home alone. Every storm, every creak of the house, every shadow makes me think about that night. I know what it feels like to be utterly vulnerable, to hear someone inside your home when you're supposed to be safe. And the worst part is knowing they might come back. I tell this story not to scare anyone unnecessarily, but to make them understand the reality of being home alone. It's not the movies or the books that get you. It's the silence, the subtle sounds, the awareness that someone has been in your space, watching, waiting, and that there's nothing you could do to stop it in time. I still check every door, every window, and every lock before I go to bed. I sleep with a bat and phone next to me. I know it might sound paranoid, but after that night, there's no such thing as too cautious. The memory of the whispers, the dragging, the footsteps above my head is permanent. Even with all the precautions, sometimes I hear things. The floor creaks in a certain way, a shadow falls across the room, and I am instantly back in that house, 16 years old, home alone, waiting for someone who isn't supposed to be there. I've had nightmares about it for years. Sometimes I dream that the intruder never left, that he's still somewhere in the house, hiding, waiting. The sound of the rain, the tapping, the creaking, every little noise can send me into a panic. I know it sounds extreme, but you don't realize how vulnerable you are until it happens to you. Until someone is in your house and you are alone and you can't call for help in time. There's a lasting fear that no amount of security or reassurance can fix. Even now, staying at a friend's house, I triple check the locks and windows. The feeling of someone watching doesn't completely leave. I know rationally that I'm safe, but the memory of that night is carved into me. It's a part of me, a permanent scar on my sense of safety and security. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if the intruder had been more violent, or if I hadn't had the sense to hide and call for help. It's a thought I try not to dwell on, but it lingers, like the shadows at the edge of the room, waiting. People ask why I never stayed home alone again. It's simple. I don't want to risk it. I don't want to hear the whispers, the dragging, the footsteps, and feel that helplessness again. Some nights, I even sleep with lights on. The fear doesn't go away entirely, and I don't think it ever will. That night changed me. It showed me how fragile our sense of security is, how quickly it can be shattered. I learned to trust my instincts, to take precautions seriously, and to never underestimate the possibility that someone could invade your home. Even now, years later, the memory is vivid. I remember the sound of the basement door creaking, The whispers in the hallway, the dragging across the floor, the soft thump in the attic. I remember the cold draft from the window, the fear that someone was inside, watching, waiting. No movie, no story, nothing can prepare you for the reality of being home alone and realizing that someone has entered your space with no reason other than to terrify you. It's a fear that lingers long after the storm has passed, long after the intruder has disappeared, long after you convince yourself it's over. Even now, when I walk into an empty house, I check the locks twice, sometimes three times. Every shadow, every creak, every sound makes me pause. And sometimes when it's quiet, I swear I hear the faintest whisper, just like that night, reminding me that some fears never truly leave. Story the end. I was 15 when it happened, and for context, my parents trusted me to be home alone on weekends, especially after my older sister moved out for college. It wasn't something out of the ordinary, just a quiet house in a suburban Pennsylvania neighborhood, and I was used to the silence, the creaks, and the occasional thump of the old plumbing. That Friday night, my parents were out for a rare dinner and movie night without me, and my sister was with friends downtown. I had the house to myself, and initially, I was excited about it. No curfew, no nagging, and the freedom to binge watch whatever I wanted. The night started normal enough. I made some mac and cheese for dinner, watched a couple of episodes of a show I had been keeping up with, and checked the locks and windows before settling in on the couch. By 9, it had started raining heavily, the kind of relentless November downpour that turns streets into reflective rivers and makes the wind scream through tree branches. I remember feeling a little uneasy when I looked out the front window. The street was almost empty, and the houses on either side seemed swallowed by the dark and wet, the occasional porch light flickering. I shrugged it off, thinking the weather just made everything look scarier than usual. Around 10, I started hearing noises. At first, they were subtle, soft scratches and taps that I attributed to the rain or the wind rattling loose siding. But when I heard a definite creak upstairs, my chest tightened. I lived in a 2-story house. Upstairs was my parents' room, the guest room, and the bathroom. No one was supposed to be up there. I told myself it was the house settling. I tried to focus on the TV, turning the volume higher, hoping the sound would mask the unease building in my chest. A few minutes later, I heard it again, this time a thud from the basement. Not a random settling noise, not the house shifting. It was heavy, deliberate. My stomach sank. The basement was always locked with a padlock my parents insisted on keeping secure. It was where we stored old furniture, boxes, and holiday decorations. I froze, my mind racing. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe a raccoon had gotten in. I tried to rationalize it, but my heart was already pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. I grabbed my phone, dialing my best friend, Rachel. When she picked up, I spoke quickly, whispering, trying to make sense of what was happening without sounding hysterical. "I think someone's in the house," I said. She laughed lightly at first, assuming I was exaggerating, but I could hear her shift in her chair when I described the sounds. I stayed on the line with her, walking from room to room, checking locks and windows. The basement door was still padlocked, but the sound I had heard made my chest tighten. By 11, the rain had intensified, and the noise upstairs had begun again, this time with soft, dragging sounds from the hallway. I didn't dare go up there, instead retreating to my parents' room, where I locked the door and moved the dresser against it for good measure. My phone was clutched in my hands, the screen casting a faint glow on my panicked face. The house seemed to pulse around me, the hum of the fridge, the dripping of water somewhere upstairs, the groans of the house itself. But there was something else now, something deliberate. Then came the whispering. It was low, almost inaudible, like someone was speaking directly into my mind. I couldn't make out words, but it was definitely human. It seemed to come from every direction at once, echoing off the walls. My fingers trembled over the phone as I told Rachel what was happening, trying not to scream. She urged me to leave the house if I could, but with the rain and the storm, I felt trapped. My parents were hours away, and I couldn't imagine running out into the street in that storm, barefoot and alone. That's when I heard the knock at the window. I swear I froze, my entire body locked in place. I had one small window in my parents' bedroom, the kind that opened slightly for ventilation. There it was, a figure, partially hidden by the storm, staring directly at me. I couldn't see much. A hood, dark eyes, but the intensity was undeniable. I felt it in my chest, a raw, unrelenting fear. The figure's presence was like a weight pressing down, making it impossible to breathe normally. I didn't move. I couldn't. Another knock came, slow and deliberate, then a soft scrape like fingernails across wood. I whispered to Rachel, "I can see someone." At the window, my voice trembling. She was silent for a moment, then said, "Stay calm. Don't let them see you." I pressed myself against the wall, my phone pressed against my ear, heart hammering. Minutes passed. The sound of the storm outside mixed with the figure's subtle movements made it feel like hours. I could hear it shifting, sometimes still, sometimes scraping the siding softly, almost testing me. Then, faintly, I heard it move toward the back of the house. My stomach twisted. My bedroom was at the front, and I realized the figure could be inside, in the back rooms, and I would never know until it was too late. I thought about calling 911 again, but Rachel urged me to keep the line open and not hang up until help arrived. I didn't dare leave the room. I remember crouching behind the dresser, holding the phone, trying to keep my breathing shallow. The whispers returned, closer now, as if the figure had somehow moved within the house, always just out of sight. I could hear dragging from the basement, subtle but steady, like someone was moving boxes or furniture around. By the time I heard sirens in the distance, the figure at the window had vanished. I remember a wave of relief, immediate and intense, but tempered by fear. I didn't know if it was gone or just hiding, waiting. The police arrived moments later, scouring the house. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing to suggest anyone had been inside. The basement padlock was missing, though, and the officers looked puzzled, shaking their heads. "Maybe you locked it loosely last time," one of them suggested, but the unease didn't leave me. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Every creak of the house, every flicker of light made my heart race. I checked the locks repeatedly, moved furniture to block doors, and kept a knife under the pillow, just in case. The next morning, my parents returned, none the wiser. I didn't tell them everything. Just that the house had been stormy and I had been nervous. I didn't want them to worry too much, but the memory of those eyes at the window stayed with me. Weeks passed. I tried to return to normal, but something had changed. I stopped feeling safe at home alone. Every time I was left alone, I imagined the figure outside, imagined the whispers, imagined the scraping sounds coming from the basement. I installed extra locks, motion lights, even a security camera, but it didn't help the fear. Months later, a neighbor mentioned seeing a man wandering the streets during storms, someone who had a history of burglary and trespassing. They never caught him. The police never connected him to my house, but it explained the figure, the whispers, the feeling of being watched. I never saw him again, but I never forgot that night. The storm, the scraping, the figure at the window, it was real, and it was deliberate. Even now, whenever I'm home alone and it's dark or raining, I feel a knot in my stomach. I check the locks more than necessary, glance out the windows a few extra times, and I still feel that weight, that presence, that someone could be out there, waiting, watching, patient, and silent. That night taught me something terrifying but simple. It doesn't take a ghost or a monster to make you feel completely helpless. Sometimes it's a real person, someone patient, someone deliberate, someone willing to wait until you're completely alone. Story the end. It was a Friday evening in early October, the kind of night where the air is crisp and the sky darkens quickly, bringing an eerie calm over the quiet suburban neighborhood. Megan's parents had left for a weekend trip to visit her aunt in Ohio, leaving her home alone for the first time in months. She was 17, and though she'd been home alone a handful of times before, she couldn't shake the flutter of excitement and nerves bubbling in her stomach. This time, she would have the house entirely to herself, and she intended to enjoy it. Late-night movies, snacks, and the freedom to do whatever she wanted without parental oversight. The first few hours passed uneventfully. Megan had made herself a small dinner, eaten it in front of the TV, and settled onto the couch with her laptop to binge-watch a series she had been putting off. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Inside, the house was warm and smelled faintly of her mother's vanilla-scented candles. Everything felt normal, almost comforting, until she heard it, a soft creaking sound coming from upstairs. Megan froze. She was the only one home. The sound repeated, subtle, almost hesitant, like someone testing the floorboards. Her heart raced, but she convinced herself it was the house settling, or perhaps the wind. She closed her laptop and stood up, listening. Creak. Another sound, this time from the hallway upstairs. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. "It's nothing," she whispered to herself, though her voice trembled. She debated going upstairs to check, but a sense of caution held her back. Instead, she went to the kitchen and grabbed a large kitchen knife, holding it loosely but feeling a strange reassurance from its presence. Returning to the living room, she tried to distract herself by turning on music, with Sek hoping the sound would drown out her imagination. But the creaking continued, now accompanied by a soft tapping noise that seemed deliberate, like someone gently knocking on the walls. Her pulse quickened as fear replaced rational thought. Megan considered calling her parents, but she remembered they were hours away, and she didn't want to worry them unnecessarily. The idea of calling the police crossed her mind, but she hesitated, not wanting to overreact. Still, something about the house didn't feel right. The creaking, the tapping, it was deliberate. Someone was moving inside, and it wasn't the wind. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Megan's thoughts raced as she tried to recall if she had locked all the doors. The front door was deadbolted, and the back door had been double-checked before her parents left. Windows were shut, but a sense of unease gnawed at her. She moved toward the stairs slowly, every step of the hardwood floor magnifying the sound of her own heartbeat. When she reached the top of the stairs, she could hear it clearly now. Footsteps, soft and deliberate, pacing back and forth along the hallway. She pressed her back against the wall, trying to make herself invisible, and whispered, "Who's there?" No answer came. Only the slow, echoing steps continuing down the hall. Megan's mind flashed to the worst-case scenarios. A burglar, a stalker, someone who had been watching the house. Her stomach twisted with fear, but she tried to stay calm, rationalizing that perhaps it was a neighbor's kid playing a prank, though she knew deep down that wasn't possible. She decided to call a friend, dialing her best friend Jessica, voice shaking as she explained what was happening. Jessica's calm voice over the phone helped a little, telling her to stay hidden and not make a sound. Megan crouched behind her bedroom door, clutching the knife, listening as the intruder moved through the house with an unnerving ease. Drawers opened and closed somewhere down the hall, a muffled thump of objects being disturbed. Every creak of the floorboards made Megan flinch, heart racing faster than ever. Then she heard it, a whisper, faint, almost inaudible, coming from somewhere near the living room. Megan's blood ran cold. She strained to hear the words, but they were indistinguishable, muttered quickly and softly. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized the intruder knew she was home. The thought made her body freeze. Fear rooted her in place, unable to move or even think clearly. Time became distorted. Minutes, maybe hours, passed with her listening to the house being methodically explored. The intruder's movements were deliberate, like they were searching for something specific. Megan stayed under her bed, silent, praying they wouldn't come upstairs. She could feel every creak of the stairs as they ascended, the shadow of their presence growing closer. Finally, the footsteps stopped just outside her bedroom. Megan held her breath, trying not to make a sound. The doorknob turned slowly, almost teasingly, then clicked as it locked into place from the inside. Panic surged, and she realized she needed to act. She grabbed her phone from her bedside table, trying to dial 911, but the line was dead. Her heart hammered. The intruder pushed the door open slightly, a shadow stretching across the floor. Megan braced herself, ready to defend herself with the knife, but before the figure entered, a loud crash from downstairs startled both of them. The intruder hesitated, then fled, the sound of heavy footsteps racing down the stairs and out the back door. Megan collapsed against the wall, shaking uncontrollably. She called 911 again, reporting the break-in, explaining everything she had witnessed. When the police arrived, they found evidence of forced entry, a back door slightly ajar, fingerprints on various surfaces, but no sign of the intruder. Nothing of significant value had been taken, leaving the officers puzzled but confirming Megan's account. In the days that followed, Megan couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every sound in the house, every shadow on the wall, sent her into a panic. She slept with the doors locked and windows shut, lights on in every room. Friends came over, but even their presence didn't alleviate the tension that had settled in her chest. The memory of the intruder, the slow pacing, the whispers, haunted her waking hours and dreams alike. Weeks later, reviewing the footage from her parents' old security camera revealed a shadowy figure outside the back window a few nights before the incident, lingering just out of sight, watching the house. They never identified the person and no arrests were made. Megan moved her room to the far side of the house, installed new locks, and invested in an updated security system. But the psychological impact remained. She had learned firsthand how vulnerable one could feel in a familiar space, a place once considered safe, turning into a source of terror in an instant. Years later, she would still hear noises that reminded her of that night. The creak of floorboards, the knock of a branch on the siding, a whisper carried by the wind, and feel a familiar chill run down her spine. The fear never fully left her. The house never quite felt like home again, and the shadow of that night lingered, a silent, invisible presence in every corner, every darkened hallway. The terror wasn't just in what had happened, but in the knowledge of what could have happened, and the unshakable certainty that someone had been inside her home, fully aware of her presence, and had chosen to leave without being caught. Megan never stayed home alone again for long periods, always finding excuses to be elsewhere or asking a friend to stay. Even with a fully functional security system, she could feel the tension in the air, the sense of being watched that clung to the walls and furniture like an invisible residue. It was a constant reminder that danger could appear anywhere at any time, and that the safety of her home was never absolute. The incident became a story she would tell cautiously to friends or therapists, but never to strangers, because the terror she felt wasn't just about a break-in, it was about the intimacy of fear. The realization that someone had been there, in her space, knowing every step, every sound, every breath, and choosing when to reveal themselves. Even on nights when she was safe in someone else's home, that night's memory would resurface. She would wake from sleep to a creak, a tap, a shadow, and feel that same stomach-churning fear, as though the intruder had never left and was still somewhere just beyond her perception. The trauma had etched itself into her consciousness. It wasn't just the fear of being alone anymore. It was the fear of being seen, of being watched, of being vulnerable in a place that should have been her sanctuary. The experience left Megan hyper-aware, cautious to the point of paranoia, but it also taught her resilience. She learned to trust her instincts, to recognize when something felt wrong, and to take precautions seriously. She never underestimated the small noises, the faint shadows, or the sudden shifts in her environment. Every sound became a signal, every movement a potential threat. The intruder's presence had left a permanent mark, a silent understanding that the ordinary, the everyday, could suddenly transform into a scene of terror. Even as an adult, Megan kept her home fortified, her windows locked and her doors reinforced. She never stopped checking locks, never ignored strange sounds, and never assumed that safety was permanent. The memory of that night, of the slow, deliberate steps and the whispers just beyond comprehension, remained a constant companion, a reminder that vulnerability could appear in any moment, and that home, while familiar, could never be entirely safe. The fear lingered, subtle but persistent, like a shadow in the corner of her mind, waiting to remind her that the terror of that night was real, and it was something she would carry with her forever. Story the end. It started as a normal Friday evening, the kind of quiet night that made me feel almost guilty for enjoying being home alone. I was 16, and my parents had gone out to a dinner and a late movie, leaving me in our two-story house on the outskirts of Pittsburgh. My older sister had already moved out for college, so the house felt emptier than usual. A little too quiet, though I always prided myself on handling being alone. I locked the doors, double-checked the windows, and settled onto the couch with a bowl of popcorn and a stack of DVDs I'd been saving for a night like this. The sky was heavy with clouds, the wind already picking up, rustling tree branches outside. At first, everything was normal. I flicked through channels, finally settling on a sitcom. laughing at the canned laughter that seemed unnervingly loud in the empty house. I had just poured another bowl of popcorn when I heard a faint tapping. I froze, listening. The rain had started lightly, drumming against the windows, but this wasn't rain. It was soft, deliberate tapping coming from the back door. I told myself it was just a branch brushing against the siding. I tried to ignore it, but then I heard it again, louder this time, almost like someone was testing the door handle. My stomach twisted. I crept toward the door, peering through the small window. Nothing. The yard was drenched, shadows of trees bending violently in the wind. I could see the fence, the empty street beyond, but no one. I let out a shaky laugh, telling myself it was just my imagination. I locked the door anyway, as an extra precaution, then moved back toward the living room. The night wore on, and the storm intensified. Rain pounded the roof in relentless sheets, and the wind whistled around the house. Every time the wind hit just right, it made the old wooden floors creak. I told myself it was normal. But then the sound of dragging came from the basement. Heavy, deliberate, slow. My heart jumped. The basement door, which had always been locked, had a small padlock my parents insisted we never leave open. I didn't remember leaving it unlocked. I froze. Maybe it was a raccoon, I thought. Maybe a stray animal had gotten in somehow. But the sound wasn't random. It was deliberate, measured, like someone was moving boxes. I tried to convince myself to ignore it, to just call it a coincidence. But I couldn't. My phone was on the kitchen counter. I grabbed it and dialed my best friend, Rachel. "Hello," she said, her voice cheerful and unsuspecting. "Rachel, I think someone's in the house," I whispered, trying not to panic. I don't know what it was, but it came from the basement. There was a pause. "Are you sure?" she asked. I, I don't know, but I heard dragging and, I don't know, whispering. She laughed lightly at first, but I could hear her shifting in her chair. "Okay, stay calm. Don't do anything stupid. Just hide. Call 911 if it gets worse." I moved quickly, locking the basement door behind me and sliding the nearest chair against it. I retreated to my parents' bedroom upstairs, locking the door behind me and moving the dresser in front for extra security. My phone was clutched tightly in my hands. The house felt different now, alive in a way that made me instinctively afraid. The wind rattled the windows, the rain hammered the roof, and somewhere, deep in the walls, there was movement I couldn't explain. Then came the whispering. Faint at first, almost inaudible, like someone speaking just at the edge of hearing. My stomach turned to ice. I couldn't make out the words, but it was undeniably human. It was right outside the bedroom door, moving from wall to wall, then silencing again. I pressed myself against the far wall, listening, heart pounding so loudly I was sure anyone nearby could hear it. The knocking started soon after. Slow, deliberate. It came from the bedroom window, a small casement at the front of the house. I didn't dare look, didn't want to confirm the worst. The knocking persisted, faint scratches accompanying it as if someone's fingernails traced along the frame. I whispered into the phone, telling Rachel everything I could, trying to make her understand without screaming. Minutes passed, but they stretched into eternity. I could hear footsteps now, dragging across the hardwood floor in the hallway outside. I wanted to scream, run, anything, but Rachel's calm voice over the line reminded me to stay put. The whispers grew louder, closer, circling the room, then stopping abruptly. My entire body ached with tension. Then I saw movement through the rain-streaked window. A figure, hooded, standing still, staring directly at me. I couldn't see the face, just the eyes glinting faintly in the darkness, unblinking. My heart stopped. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Every instinct told me this was real. The figure knocked again, scraping the window softly, deliberate and taunting. I pressed myself deeper into the corner behind the dresser, clutching the phone. Rachel urged me to stay quiet, stay hidden. I didn't dare even peek. The sound of footsteps in the hallway had returned, heavier now, deliberate. I could hear the faint dragging again from downstairs. My mind raced. What if there were more than one person? What if this was someone who had been watching me, waiting for the house to be empty? Sirens in the distance broke the spell, a sudden, piercing relief. The figure at the window paused, almost hesitating, then disappeared into the night. The dragging sounds stopped. My legs shook violently as I clutched the phone, whispering to Rachel to stay on the line until help arrived. When the police finally got there, they scoured the house. They found nothing. No forced entry, no footprints, nothing in the basement to suggest anyone had been inside. The padlock on the basement door was gone, though. They looked at me skeptically, asking if I might have left it unlocked. I didn't remember. My fear was dismissed as anxiety, but deep down, I knew what I had seen. Even after the storm passed and the adrenaline faded, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak, every shadow made me flinch. I installed extra locks, motion sensor lights, and a security system, but it didn't matter. I stopped staying home alone. Even years later, when I moved into my first apartment, I double-checked locks obsessively, made sure windows were secure, and never ignored strange noises. Neighbors later mentioned a man had been spotted in the area that night, a transient with a history of burglary, but he was never caught. The police never confirmed a connection to my house. It didn't matter. I remembered the figure, the whispering, the scraping on the window, the sense of being deliberately watched. That night changed me. It was a lesson in how vulnerable you really are when no one else is around, when you're completely alone. Even now, I still remember the rain, the storm, the weight of the house pressing down on me, and the eyes outside the window. I never saw the figure again, but the memory remains as vivid as ever. I don't know if it was a man, a criminal, or something worse. I only know it was real, and it wanted me to be aware of it. Being home alone isn't just about being by yourself. It's about being alone when someone else is out there, patient, watching, and waiting for the perfect moment. I still get chills when it rains. I still check every lock twice. I still hesitate before going up to bed alone. That night taught me that the most terrifying things aren't always imagined. They're real, deliberate, and terrifyingly close. Story the end. It started on a cold November evening in upstate New York. I was 16 and my parents had decided to take a weekend trip to Boston to visit my aunt and uncle. My older sister, Katie, had already gone off to her college campus for the weekend, leaving me completely alone in the house for the first time ever. The house wasn't huge, but it was isolated enough that you could hear every creak and whistle of the wind, every faint rustle of the trees outside. That evening, the sky had turned dark early, heavy clouds covering the moon, and a sharp wind rattled the windows. At first, everything seemed normal. I ate leftover macaroni and cheese for dinner, watched a couple of episodes of my favorite show, and made sure all doors and windows were locked, just like my parents had told me. I felt a sense of pride in my independence. I could finally watch scary movies, eat junk food, and play video games late into the night without anyone telling me to go to bed. By around 9 o'clock, the wind had picked up and a storm was rolling in. I could hear the rain tapping against the roof and the trees scraping against the siding of the house. It was the kind of sound that usually comforted me, the house reacting to the elements outside. But that night, it made me nervous. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I found myself checking the locks on the doors again. I had just sat down on the couch with my phone and a blanket when I heard it, a faint tapping on the living room window. I froze. At first, I thought it was just a branch swaying in the wind, but then it came again, deliberate and slow, like someone was knocking with their fingernails. My heart started pounding. I told myself it was nothing. Just a branch. Just a branch. I peeked out the window but couldn't see anything. The backyard was dark, obscured by the storm, and the rain made it nearly impossible to see. I tried to laugh it off, but the unease settled in my stomach like a stone. I went to the kitchen to pour myself some water, but the sound of the tapping followed me, this time at the back door. My stomach sank. I had locked that door, dead-bolted it, even checked it twice. Whoever, or whatever, was outside wasn't supposed to be there. I crept closer, straining to see through the small window in the door, but the glass was streaked with rain, and the shadows made it impossible to tell anything. The tapping stopped. I went back to the living room and tried to distract myself with TV, but my attention kept going back to the windows and doors. Every gust of wind, every creak of the house sounded too deliberate. Around 10 o'clock, the lights flickered once and then went out entirely, plunging the house into darkness. My phone had about 20% battery left, so I grabbed it and used it as a flashlight. The storm had knocked out the power completely. I was about to call my parents when I heard it, a soft, deliberate footstep in the hallway outside the living room. My heart nearly stopped. The sound was slow, careful, as if someone knew exactly how to move without being heard. My pulse was racing, and I felt my hands shake. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under the couch and tiptoed toward the stairs. The footstep came again, then another, moving closer. My house was supposed to be empty. I froze at the top of the stairs, straining to see. Nothing. But then the sound of breathing, a low, deliberate exhale, echoed from the living room. Whoever it was, they were inside. I backed away slowly and ran to my bedroom, slamming the door and locking it. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering into the receiver. The operator's voice was calm, but I could barely focus. I told her someone had entered my home, that I was alone, and that they were moving through the house. Minutes felt like hours. I could hear movement, the faint dragging of something across the floor, a whisper I couldn't make out, the soft thumps from the stairs. I pressed myself against the wall, clutching the bat, trying to stay as quiet as possible. Then suddenly, the sound of shuffling stopped. Silence. Too complete, too deliberate. I could feel my skin crawl. The intruder hadn't fled. They were just waiting, somewhere in the house. I considered hiding in the closet, but the thought of someone opening it and reaching in made me shake uncontrollably. I stayed in my room, heart racing, listening to every creak, every whisper of the wind outside. Then came a sound that made me scream silently into my pillow. The slow, deliberate scratching at my bedroom door. Whoever it was, they knew I was in there. They were testing the lock, trying to get in. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone, but I whispered to the operator, telling her exactly what was happening. She assured me that officers were on the way, but in the meantime, I had to stay calm and hidden. The scratching stopped. I held my breath, listening. Minutes later, I heard the soft creak of my bedroom window. My heart leapt into my throat. The lock was intact, but the wind had moved the curtains in a way that made it feel like someone was peering in. I backed away, clutching the bat, trying to tell myself it was the wind, that it couldn't be real. And then I heard it, the softest whisper right outside the door. My name, Emma, it hissed. My stomach dropped. This was no intruder content with just being in the house. This person knew I was home alone, and they were trying to terrify me. I stayed pressed against the wall, trying not to make a sound. The whispering moved away slowly, and I heard footsteps retreating down the hallway. I didn't dare move. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, listening to the storm outside, waiting for the police. When the officers arrived, they found signs of forced entry at the back door and sliding glass door in the living room. Footprints led from the house into the woods behind our property. Nothing was stolen. The intruder had been inside, moving through the house, but they hadn't taken anything. Their goal was fear. Even after the police left, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my bedroom, lights on, door locked, listening to every sound. I kept thinking I saw shadows move in the corners of the room, imagined whispers in the dark. I didn't go downstairs until the storm had passed, checking every corner before I dared step foot in the living room or kitchen. The next morning, my parents returned. They were shocked by what had happened and immediately installed security cameras and an alarm system. But the memory of that night stayed with me. The sound of the footsteps, the whispers, the dragging across the floor, the scratching at my bedroom door, they were imprinted in my mind. I never felt completely safe at home again. Even now, years later, I check every lock and window before going to bed. I sleep with a bat and my phone next to me. Any creak in the house, any sound that isn't immediately explainable, sets my heart racing. The fear never truly leaves. The intruder didn't have to hurt me or steal anything to leave a permanent mark. Sometimes I still hear whispers when I'm home alone, soft, almost inaudible, and I feel the same terror I did that night. It doesn't matter how rational I try to be. The memory of someone inside my house, knowing I was alone, is unforgettable. That night changed me. It made me hyper-aware, cautious, and never truly at ease in my own home. I tell this story to anyone who will listen because it's the reality of being home alone. It's not the movies or the books that scare you. It's the silence, the sound of your own heartbeat, the awareness that someone has entered your home while you were supposed to be safe. And it's a fear that doesn't fade with time. Even now, when I hear the wind rattling the windows or the branches scraping against the siding, I feel that same dread. I know what it's like to be completely alone and to realize someone has invaded your space, and the thought that they could return, that someone could come back to watch you, still haunts me. The house has security systems, cameras, and locks that would take hours to bypass. But none of that erases the memory of that night. The whispers, the footsteps, the dragging, the scratching at my door. They are permanent. They are real. And they remind me that being home alone isn't just about fun or freedom. Sometimes it's about surviving. Even now, I can't bring myself to stay home alone. Anytime my parents or siblings are away, I make sure a friend is with me. The fear is too deep, too ingrained. And I know it sounds paranoid, but after that night, there's no such thing as being too cautious. I still relive it in my mind. The storm, the tapping, the whispers, the dragging, the sense that someone was there just outside my reach, waiting. I will never forget it. I will never feel safe alone in my house again. And I know that fear, that vulnerability is something that doesn't ever truly go away. Story? The end. It was a quiet Thursday evening in late October, and the kind of October night that carried an almost tangible chill, the sort that seeped through the gaps in the windows and made the house feel hollow and vulnerable. I was 17 at the time, and my parents had gone out for the night to attend a friend's wedding several towns over. My older brother had a girlfriend and was away at her place, leaving me alone in the house for the first time without anyone else in the vicinity. My parents had always trusted me to handle things, but that night I felt a little uneasy. I brushed it off, assuming it was just my imagination, the way it tends to be in a house that has been empty for hours. I had planned a simple evening, pizza delivery, a horror movie, and a couple of hours of mindless internet scrolling. The house was an older American suburban home, 2 stories with a big attic and a basement that always creaked in the quiet hours. My parents liked it because it was charming, but now, alone, it felt like a place that could swallow you up if you weren't careful. The first odd thing happened just after I settled onto the couch. I was scrolling through my phone when I heard the front door creak, a long, low sound that made me sit up straight. My first thought was that it was the wind. The door didn't slam, didn't rattle, just a subtle groan that could easily be ignored. But then I remembered I had locked all the doors when I got home from school. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I muttered to myself, "It's fine. It's probably just the house settling." I got up and checked the door. Locked. Deadbolt tight. Nothing else unusual. Shaking my head, I told myself I was being paranoid and returned to the couch, picking up my pizza slice. But even as I ate, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I turned on the TV, anything to fill the silence. About an hour in, I was halfway through my movie when the phone rang. My parents had told me they'd be checking in periodically. I answered, trying to sound calm and cheerful. "Hey, Mom?" "Hi, sweetie. How's everything? Are you being good?" Her voice was warm, but I detected that subtle undertone of concern parents have when they leave their kid alone. "Yeah, everything's fine," I said, though my voice sounded shakier than I wanted. "Good. Lock the doors, keep your phone with you, and don't answer the door for anyone, even if it's a neighbor or the pizza guy." I promised I would, hung up, and tried to settle back into the movie. But I didn't even get 5 minutes in when I heard it. A soft, deliberate knock at the front door. I froze. It wasn't a casual knock. It was slow, deliberate, measured. Someone knew I was there. My heart started hammering. I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. Nothing. Empty driveway, no car, no shadows, nothing. "Probably the wind," I whispered to myself, my voice trembling. I tried to laugh it off, but it came out as more of a nervous cough. I didn't answer the door, obviously, and waited for the knock to return. It didn't. I told myself I imagined it and tried to go back to the movie. An hour later, I was in the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water when I heard the sound again, only this time it was at the back door. My stomach dropped. The back door was usually locked, and I was meticulous about that. I crept to the window, holding my breath. There, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure. Dark clothes, face obscured, standing completely still by the sliding glass door. My first instinct was to run, but I knew that going outside was insane. I dialed 911, whispering into the phone as quietly as possible, not wanting to alert the person outside. "Yes, I'm at 1428 Willow Creek Drive. I'm home alone, and there's someone outside my house." The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. Stay on the line. Do not approach the door. Stay where you are. I retreated to the living room, keeping the blinds drawn. I could see the figure through the glass, a shadow moving ever so slightly as though testing the boundaries. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they vanished. The operator stayed on the line until the police arrived, which was around 15 minutes later. They swept the house, nothing inside, nothing around, no footprints in the leaves, no sign of forced entry. I told them about the figure outside the back door, and they nodded, a little grim, but left, promising to patrol the area. I was shaken, but I tried to convince myself it was over. I stayed up for the rest of the night, doors locked, phone at my side. Nothing else happened until the early hours of the morning, when I finally drifted off, exhausted, anxiety still prickling under my skin. The next morning, my parents returned. I told them what had happened. My dad scowled and went around the house checking every lock, every window. My mom hugged me and tried to calm me down. "It's probably someone playing a prank," she said. But I didn't feel reassured. Everything seemed normal for the next few days. I went to school, hung out with friends, tried to forget the incident. But then, about a week later, I was home alone again. My parents were gone for a few hours, and I was doing homework in my room when I heard it, the slow knock at the front door. I froze, blood running cold. My hands were shaking as I reached for the phone. I considered calling 911 immediately, but I thought maybe I should just check the window first. I peeked through the blinds. Empty. Nothing. I turned back to my homework, telling myself it was the wind, just the wind. But then I heard it again, louder this time, not at the door, but coming from upstairs. The attic. Our house had an attic with a pull-down ladder, and it was always cold, dark, and silent. Except now it was making noises like someone was walking around up there. I tried to convince myself it was impossible. My parents weren't home, I was alone, and the attic was locked. But the creaking continued, slow, deliberate. My throat went dry. I called 911 again. The operator told me to stay on the line and keep quiet. Minutes passed, I could hear nothing else until, bang, something heavy fell upstairs. My heart leapt into my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then another bang, closer, like footsteps coming down the stairs. I ran to the front door, yanking it open, ready to scream, only to find the porch empty. No one. No footprints. Nothing. Just the wind. I spent the rest of the day locked in my room, too scared to leave. My parents returned that evening, and I couldn't stop shaking as I explained everything. My dad called the police again, who said they'd patrol the area more frequently. But I didn't feel safe. The next week, every night, I kept hearing noises. Footsteps, creaking doors, whispers. Sometimes it was in the middle of the night, sometimes just when the house was silent during the day. Nothing ever appeared when I checked. No figure at the windows, no intruder in the house. It was like something was just there, unseen, always present, waiting. One night I woke up to a tapping sound on my bedroom window. I froze, heart pounding. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. Nothing. Just the reflection of my own terrified face. I turned back over, trying to sleep, but then I heard it, a whisper, so close it was almost in my ear. Go. I bolted upright. My room was empty. My door was closed. I ran out of the room, down the hall, checked the locks, everything secured. Nothing was out of place, but that whisper haunted me. It got worse after that. The noises became more specific, more personal. I would hear my name whispered when no one else was home. My footsteps would echo when I was standing still. Objects in the house would shift slightly, just enough that I would notice, but never enough to prove anything. I began to dread being home alone. Even when my parents were home, I sometimes felt the presence, like eyes on me in empty rooms, shadows that didn't belong. Then one night I woke to the sound of breathing, heavy, slow, deliberate. I knew it wasn't mine. I had been holding my breath under the covers. The bedroom door creaked open. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. And then, just at the edge of the doorway, I saw it. A figure, taller than me, shadowed, indistinct. I could feel its gaze on me. And then it whispered again, "Leave." I don't remember much after that. I think I screamed. I know I ran out of the house. I called my parents. They came home immediately, and the police were called. But when they arrived, the house was empty. No one there. No footprints. No signs of entry. just the eerie feeling of being watched lingering like a thick fog. After that night, my parents never left me home alone again. I couldn't stay there by myself, not after seeing and hearing things that defied explanation. I moved my bed into my parents' room for months. The police told me it was probably a prank, maybe someone trying to scare me, but I knew it was more than that. I had felt it, seen it, heard it, and I knew with a certainty that made my blood run cold that whoever or whatever had been in my house had been watching, waiting, and it wasn't finished. Years later, I still avoid being alone in a house at night. I can't shake the memory of those footsteps, the whispers, the shadow at the doorway. Some nights, when I close my eyes, I swear I can hear it again. And I know somewhere out there it's still waiting, patient, silent, just beyond the walls of a house that feels a little too empty, a little too quiet. Story the end. It was a cold January evening in a quiet suburb of Ohio, the kind of neighborhood where the streetlights seemed to hum softly and the snow crunched sharply underfoot. The Thompsons had left for a weekend trip to visit relatives in Chicago, leaving 17-year-old Emily home alone for the first time. Her parents had reassured her over the phone, reminding her to lock the doors, not to answer the door for anyone, and to call them if anything seemed off. Emily had nodded, although the pit in her stomach betrayed her nervousness. She was used to being alone for a few hours after school, but a whole weekend without her parents felt different, almost too quiet. The first night passed without incident. Emily had made herself a simple dinner, watched a few episodes of her favorite show, and gone to bed around 10, the sound of the wind outside whispering against the windows. But sometime after midnight, she was jolted awake by a faint tapping at the back door. At first, she told herself it was just a branch scraping against the glass, but then she heard it again, a slow, deliberate tap. Her heart rate quickened. She crept to the window and peered out into the dark backyard. The snow reflected the moonlight, but there was no one there. Just as she was about to dismiss it, a shadow moved across the yard. Emily froze. It could have been a stray animal, but instinctively, she pulled the curtains closed and locked the door. She called her parents, who told her to stay inside and, if anything escalated, to call 911. She tried to calm herself, reminding herself it was probably nothing, but sleep did not come easily after that. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind felt like a threat. The next morning, Emily tried to shake off the fear. She told herself it had been a dream, an overactive imagination fueled by the darkness and isolation. She went about her day, shoveling the driveway, texting her friends, and even watching some television to distract herself. But as the afternoon wore on, she noticed something unsettling. Small items seemed out of place. A cushion on the couch had been flipped. A kitchen chair slightly moved. She had been meticulous before leaving the house, so the changes were obvious. At first, she thought she might be imagining it, or perhaps she had absent-mindedly moved things. Later, while texting a friend in the living room, she heard a faint creak from the hallway. She froze. It sounded like footsteps, but slow, deliberate, and heavy. Her stomach dropped. She remembered the security advice her parents had given her. Do not investigate. Just stay somewhere secure. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator about the possible intruder. The operator instructed her to lock herself in a room with the phone, and Emily retreated to the master bedroom, locking the door behind her. She could hear the footsteps continuing down the hallway, stopping just outside her door, then moving away. The operator stayed on the line, keeping her calm as Emily huddled under the blankets, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Minutes passed, which felt like hours. Then came a soft, deliberate tapping on the bedroom door. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The operator instructed her to stay quiet, and after a tense silence, the sound of footsteps retreated. Eventually, the police arrived. They searched the house thoroughly, but found no sign of forced entry. Nothing was stolen, and no one was inside. The officers chalked it up to a possible prowler who had fled, but Emily knew what she had heard. The following night, she tried to sleep with the lights on, but the sense of unease never left. Around 2 a.m, she heard the tapping again, this time coming from the front door. Emily's heart raced as she listened, frozen in bed. The tapping persisted, slow and steady, almost like someone testing her patience. Then a low scraping sound like metal being dragged across concrete. She pulled her comforter over her head, trying not to breathe too loudly, and called the police again. By the time they arrived, the noises had stopped. They found nothing, no fingerprints, no footprints beyond the fresh snow outside. Emily realized she was completely alone with something she couldn't see. By the third night, Emily's sense of security had completely eroded. She began to notice little things that didn't add up. Doors she was certain she had locked left slightly ajar, cupboards that were open, and her dog, Max, who had been staying with her for the trip, inexplicably barking at empty rooms in the house when she returned for a brief visit to feed him. She installed a small camera in the living room, hoping for reassurance, but the footage was unnerving. At first, it showed her moving about normally, but later in the evening, the camera captured shadows flickering across the walls, indistinct but unmistakable, moving against the grain of the room's lighting. And then the figure of a man, or something resembling one, standing silently in the corner before vanishing. Emily didn't sleep that night. She sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, clutching a kitchen knife she kept on her lap. Every sound was amplified in the quiet house, and every shadow seemed alive. Around 3 a.m, she heard it, a soft whisper, almost imperceptible, but there. Emily. Her blood ran cold. The voice was close, right outside the living room. She froze, too terrified to move. The whisper came again, slightly louder. Emily. It was her name, but not spoken like a greeting, more like a warning, a promise of something sinister. She dialed 911 with trembling fingers. This time, the operator instructed her to stay on the line and keep the lights off. Emily tiptoed to the kitchen, keeping low, and the whisper followed her. It seemed to be moving with her, always just beyond the edge of hearing, yet always unmistakably there. She crouched behind the island, heart hammering in her chest, as the voice grew louder, almost a chant now, though she couldn't make out the words clearly. The police arrived within minutes, and Emily ran to the door, flinging it open. They entered and swept the house, but found no one. Emily's parents cut their trip short and returned immediately. They installed a full security system, added reinforced locks, and stayed with her for several days. Yet, even with the increased security, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Cameras showed nothing unusual and police patrols were frequent, but the whispers and the occasional tapping didn't stop entirely. They seemed to fade when she was with someone, only to return when she was alone. Weeks later, Emily tried to return to a sense of normalcy. She went back to school, hung out with friends, and attempted to reclaim her evenings. But the house never felt the same. One night, she woke to a cold draft in her room, despite all the windows being closed and the heating running. And then she saw it, a shadow moving quickly across the far wall, too tall and distorted to be human, vanishing just as she reached for the light switch. Emily tried to rationalize what had happened, thinking maybe it was stress, maybe her mind playing tricks after the initial fear. But small incidents kept happening. Tapping at the door, whispers in empty rooms, the feeling of eyes on her even when no one was there. Her parents, though supportive, began to look uneasy themselves, noticing things they couldn't explain. Objects would be moved from where they were left, doors would be unlocked without explanation, and sometimes, late at night, the faint sound of footsteps echoed through the house. One evening, Emily decided to sleep with the lights off, thinking maybe she had been overreacting. She fell into a restless doze, only to wake to a loud bang downstairs as if something heavy had been thrown against the wall. Frozen, she grabbed her phone, dialing 911 in a panic. As she whispered into the phone, she heard the familiar voice again, right next to her ear. Emily. She froze, unable to breathe, and the line went silent. The phone slipped from her hands as she turned to see the doorway empty, but the temperature in the room plummeted, her breath visible in the sudden cold. After that night, Emily refused to be alone. She slept with a friend, stayed at relatives' houses, and avoided the house whenever possible. Her parents tried to sell the property, but prospective buyers always backed out after a single visit, claiming an uneasy feeling they couldn't explain. Neighbors whispered about the strange noises, odd shadows, and unexplained disturbances in the Thompsons' home, though no one could prove anything. Months later, Emily's parents had moved to a new home several towns over. Emily returned to her old room once to gather belongings, only to feel the same oppressive chill she had felt all those nights. She glanced at the hallway, and for a brief moment, the shadow she had seen countless times stood at the end of the hall, watching. Then it vanished. Emily never spent another night alone in that house again. Even years later, when she moved into her own apartment in a different state, she was haunted by memories of the tapping, the whispers, and the sense of being watched. She knew that whatever had been in that house hadn't been human, that it had been something patient, something waiting. And though she tried to live normally, she could never shake the feeling that it had not forgotten her, that it lingered in the corners of her memory, ready to return if given the chance. Story the end. It was a Tuesday evening in late October when everything started. My parents had told me they'd be out of town for a week, my dad on a business trip, and my mom visiting her sister in Ohio. I was 14, home alone for the first time without a babysitter, and at first I thought it was going to be great. No rules about bedtime, full control over what I watched, and complete freedom to order pizza whenever I wanted. My neighborhood was quiet, the kind where everyone knew each other, and the idea of danger felt abstract, like something in a movie rather than real life. But that night, that abstract idea started to become very real. I was in the living room watching a horror movie marathon, feeling a little silly for being alone but enjoying the thrill of it. My dog, Max, a black Labrador, was curled up beside me, snoring lightly. Every now and then the house would creak or the wind would rattle the windows, but I told myself it was normal. Old houses did that. I kept the porch light on, the front door locked, and my phone within reach. The first odd thing happened around 10 o'clock. I heard what sounded like footsteps in the hallway upstairs. My house was 2 stories, and I live alone, except for Max. I paused the movie, straining to hear. Max's ears perked up, but he didn't growl, which I took as a good sign. The footsteps stopped. I shrugged it off as the house settling or maybe the wind causing the floorboards to creak. An hour later, I went upstairs to brush my teeth. The hallway felt colder than usual, and I had a weird feeling, like someone was watching me. I shook it off and went into the bathroom, locking the door behind me. As I looked in the mirror, I noticed the reflection of the hallway behind me. For a split second, I thought I saw a dark shadow move past the doorway. I froze. Max barked downstairs and I jumped, spinning around, but of course there was nothing there. My heart was racing and I laughed nervously at myself. "You're being stupid," I muttered. I brushed my teeth quickly and ran back downstairs. The house felt different, quieter, in a way that wasn't normal, like the usual hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic had disappeared. I sat on the couch, trying to focus on my movie again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I texted my friend Jenna, trying to sound casual. "House is creepy tonight, alone for the first time. Ugh." She replied immediately, telling me to stay safe and maybe keep a light on. I smiled at the thought, feeling a little better. Around midnight, the wind picked up outside. I was scrolling through my phone when I heard it, a faint tapping at the front window. I froze. Max growled low in his throat, something he never did without reason. I slowly got up, peering out the blinds. Nothing. The street was empty, the neighbors' houses dark. I tried to convince myself it was a branch hitting the glass, but the tap came again, slightly louder. My stomach sank. I wasn't supposed to be scared. I was supposed to be brave. I kept telling myself that, but I couldn't shake the pit in my stomach. I went to check all the locks on the doors. Front door, locked. Back door, locked. Windows locked. Everything seemed fine. I told Max to settle down and tried to go back to the living room, but that's when I heard it. The slow, deliberate creak of the back door opening. My blood ran cold. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife I could find, and crept toward the door that led to the back porch. Max was growling like I'd never heard before, hair on his back standing up. The door was slightly ajar, swinging in the wind, even though I was certain I had locked it. I tried calling my parents, but my phone said no signal. Panic started to set in. I ran to the front door, considered running out into the street, but then remembered it was pitch black outside. I grabbed Max, holding him tightly, and ran upstairs, locking myself in my bedroom. My bedroom window faced the side yard, and I could see the faint glow of the streetlight, but nothing else. I kept my phone close, still no signal. I didn't know what to do. I considered calling 911 with the landline, but I hesitated, thinking maybe it was nothing, and then I heard the whisper. It was faint, almost like the wind, but unmistakable. My name. Emily. I froze, barely breathing. Max barked, then whimpered, backing into the corner. The whisper came again, clearer this time, coming from the hallway outside my door. Emily, come out. My legs were trembling. I gripped the knife tighter, sliding the door open just a crack to peek. The hallway was empty, silent, but the air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I backed away from the door and sat on my bed, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was sleep deprivation. Maybe it was the movie. But my instincts told me it wasn't. I could feel it. Something was in the house, something that didn't belong. I didn't want to think about it, but the sound of slow footsteps started again, moving across the floorboards outside my room. I could hear them stop, then start again, each step deliberate, like that the person knew I was up there. Hours passed. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined someone standing at the foot of my bed. The whispers continued, soft, unintelligible words, just at the edge of hearing. Max refused to leave my side, growling at shadows that weren't there. The first light of dawn was starting to creep through my window when I finally heard a thump from downstairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone moving through the living room. My heart raced. I had to do something. I called my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, who had a spare key to check on me if I ever needed it. My voice was shaky as I explained what was happening. She promised she'd be over immediately. While I waited, I kept the knife in my lap, eyes fixed on the door. The thumping downstairs continued, slower now, almost like deliberate pacing. And then I heard it, the front door opening and closing. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel the presence. I whispered, "Please, just leave." My voice sounded weak, even to me. Then the sound stopped. Silence, a silence so heavy it made my ears ring. I didn't move. Max didn't move. I waited, barely breathing. And then the front door slammed open again, harder this time, shaking the walls. I screamed, grabbing Max and running to my bedroom closet, locking the door behind me. I curled up in the corner, clutching him, shaking uncontrollably. Minutes later, I heard Mrs. Thompson's voice outside, calling my name. Relief flooded me. I scrambled out of the closet, opening the door to find her at the top of the stairs. She ran down, checking the house with me, but there was no one. No sign of forced entry, nothing missing, no footprints in the dirt outside. My heart was still racing. The police came later, questioning me, checking the house. They found nothing. No forced entry, no one hiding, no one outside. I tried to explain what I had heard, but they didn't take it seriously. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it was stress. But I knew what I had heard. I knew what had happened. After that week, my parents returned. I tried to act normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched in my own home. At night, I slept with the lights on, Max always by my side. Weeks later, I found scratches on the back door, deep and jagged, as if something had tried to claw its way in. No explanation, no evidence. Just the scratches and the memory of whispers in the dark. Years later, I moved out. I tried to forget about that week. But sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still hear faint tapping on the windows, faint whispers calling my name, and I remember the heavy presence creeping through the house, patient, deliberate, and still waiting. Story the end. It was a Friday evening in early November, and the wind outside rattled the windows with that kind of cold persistence that makes you realize winter isn't just coming, it's already testing the edges of your patience. The house was quiet, almost unnaturally so. I was 15 at the time, and my parents had gone out for the weekend to visit my grandparents about 2 hours away. I was thrilled at first, imagining the freedom of being alone, the luxury of blasting music, and eating junk food whenever I wanted, and staying up late watching movies. The reality, however, would turn out far stranger than I could have imagined. The first few hours passed without incident. I had made myself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and was sprawled across the couch, laptop on my lap, watching some late-night comedy show. My dog, Buddy, was curled up at the other end of the couch, occasionally flicking his ears at the creaks and groans that any house naturally makes. Around 9, I went to check the locks on the doors and windows, just as a precaution. Everything was secure. I told myself I was just being careful, but there was a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach, one of those instincts you learn to ignore until it proves you right. By 10 o'clock, the wind had picked up, and the bare branches of the trees scratched against the siding of the house in a way that sounded almost like fingernails on a chalkboard. I closed all the curtains, double-checked the doors again, and made my way back to the living room. That's when I first noticed it, an odd sound coming from upstairs. At first, I chalked it up to the house settling or Buddy moving in his sleep, but it was different. A soft, dragging sound, almost like someone was pulling something across the floor. "Buddy," I whispered, trying to sound calm. He lifted his head, ears pricked, but didn't move from the couch. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Maybe the wind had knocked something over upstairs, I thought. But then I heard it again, more deliberate this time, a slow scraping noise like feet dragging against the hardwood. I set the laptop aside and went to the stairs, calling out softly, "Hello? Dad?" No answer, of course. My parents were miles away. I could feel Buddy tense behind me as I began to climb the stairs, every creak of the wooden steps amplifying the tension. When I reached the top, I saw nothing in the hallway. The doors to my parents' bedroom, the guest room, and the bathroom were all closed. My room at the far end of the hall was also closed. I paused, straining to hear any sound, and that's when I noticed the window at the end of the hall. It was slightly ajar. I knew I had closed it that morning. Slowly, I approached it, my heart hammering in my chest. I grabbed the edge of the window to check if it had been forced open, but it didn't feel like it. There were no marks, no scratches, no signs of entry. Just open. I shook my head. Maybe it had been the wind. Maybe I had forgotten. But then I heard it again, the dragging sound. This time it was coming from the guest room. I froze. My parents rarely used the guest room, and we hadn't had anyone over for weeks. Buddy growled low in his throat. I didn't want to believe what I was thinking, but there was no other explanation. Someone, or something, was in the house with me. I backed away from the door, trying to think rationally. The phone in the living room could call 911, but I was upstairs, and the thought of running downstairs past someone who might already be there terrified me. My hands shook as I reached for my dad's baseball bat from the corner of my room. I gripped it tightly and crept toward the guest room. Every step I took felt impossibly loud in the quiet house. I paused at the door, my ear pressed to the wood. The dragging sound had stopped. I waited, counting silently, and then I heard it again, but this time it was followed by a whisper. A soft, almost inaudible voice saying something I couldn't understand. My breath caught in my throat. I swung the door open. The room was empty. Nothing was out of place, no signs of anyone having been there. The closet door was closed, the bed neatly made, the floor clear. I let out a shaky laugh, telling myself I was just imagining things. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the far wall, scrawled in what looked like mud or dirt, were 3 words, "I see you." Buddy barked, a sharp, panicked sound, and I jumped. My first instinct was to run downstairs and out of the house, but then I froze. The back door, the one in the kitchen, was wide open. I had locked it before my parents left. Now it stood ajar, swinging slightly with the wind. I ran to it, slamming it shut and locking it as fast as I could, fumbling with the keys. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped them. I checked every other door and window in the house. All locked, all secure. Yet that sense of being watched didn't go away. I could feel it, heavy and suffocating, like a presence hovering just beyond the corner of my vision. I called 911, trying to keep my voice steady. The operator answered quickly, and I explained the situation as calmly as I could. They assured me officers were on the way and told me to stay in a secure room until they arrived. I chose my room, locking the door behind me and sitting with Buddy in my lap, gripping the bat. I tried to distract myself with my phone, scrolling mindlessly through social media, but I couldn't shake the feeling that every shadow was moving, that every creak was closer than it should be. Time passed agonizingly slowly. Around 30 minutes later, I heard sirens in the distance, growing louder. Relief flooded me, but it was tempered by a new chilling sound, the front door handle rattling. My blood ran cold. The police were outside, but someone, or something, was still trying to get in. I shouted for them, and they rushed in, guns drawn, sweeping the house with flashlights. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no one hiding, nothing. They told me it was likely someone had been in the house earlier but left when they heard the sirens. They reassured me and took my statement, but I didn't feel reassured. That night, I slept in my parents' bed, Buddy at my side, and I kept the baseball bat close. The next morning, my parents came home. I told them everything, from the dragging sounds to the writing on the wall. They were horrified but tried to rationalize it. Perhaps a neighborhood kid playing a prank. Maybe someone had snuck in through an unlocked window, they said. But there were a few things they couldn't explain. The first was Buddy's behavior. Normally calm, he refused to go upstairs for weeks afterward. He would growl at the hallway and the guest room door, even when no one was there. The second was the writing. No matter how many times we cleaned that wall, it would reappear, faintly at first and then bolder, always in the same handwriting. It never said anything different, always just, "I see you." Months went by and life returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after what happened. But every time I was home alone, that same feeling would creep in, the same oppressive sense that someone was just beyond the edge of my vision, watching. I started hearing small noises, scratches, whispers, the faint sound of dragging, always in the guest room. I told myself it was imagination. I had to, or I wouldn't have been able to function. One night, about a year later, my parents went out again, leaving me alone. I was older now, braver, or at least I thought I was. I was sitting in the living room doing homework when I heard the sound again, a slow, deliberate dragging from upstairs. My heart pounded, and Buddy immediately jumped off the couch, barking furiously. I froze, listening. The sound stopped, then a whisper came, just like before. "I see you." I didn't move. I couldn't. Then came a slow knock at the front door. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. Buddy growled, hair standing on end. I grabbed my phone and called the police immediately. As I waited, I watched through the blinds. No one was there. The knocking had stopped. The officers arrived quickly, but again found nothing. No footprints, no evidence, no forced entry. They advised me to keep the doors locked and to call them if anything else happened. I did, but nothing more happened for a while. I tried to put it behind me, to convince myself it was all a series of coincidences, that the house settling, the wind, my imagination, Buddy's sensitive hearing, all of it. But then, one evening, my parents left for a short trip, and I stayed home alone. Around 9, I heard it again, the dragging sound, faint at first, then louder, more deliberate. Buddy barked and ran to the stairs. I grabbed my bat and crept up. At the top of the stairs, I saw it, my parents' guest room door slowly creaking open by itself. My heart stopped. I froze then in a whisper. I heard it again. "I see you." I didn't wait. I ran down the stairs, through the living room, and out the front door, Buddy at my heels. I ran to the neighbor's house, pounding on their door until they let me in. The police arrived, but of course, no one was there. They told me to stay somewhere else that night. I didn't go home until the next day, and even then, I stayed with friends for weeks. To this day, I don't know who or what was in my house. The writing on the wall eventually stopped appearing, but the sense of being watched never left completely. Buddy, now old, still refuses to go near the guest room. And every time I'm home alone, especially at night, I hear that faint, slow dragging sound, and I feel eyes on me. It's been years, and I still wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I heard something at the foot of my bed, convinced that someone is standing just outside my door. I tell myself it's all in my head, that it's impossible, but I know better. Some things can't be explained. Some things, once they've entered your life, never leave. I've moved out of that house now, but every time I pass it, I feel that same chill, that same oppressive sense that I'm being watched, that I'm never truly alone. And sometimes late at night, I swear I can see a faint outline in the guest room window, just staring, just waiting, just whispering, "I see you." Story the end. It was a Friday evening in late November when everything started to feel off. The air was cold and dry, the kind that made your nose itch and your fingers crack if you weren't careful with lotion. I was 15 at the time, and my parents had left for a long weekend trip to Chicago, leaving me home alone for the first time with just my dog, Max, a golden retriever who was half lazy, half hyper, depending on the hour. They'd promised me freedom, movie nights, staying up late, and ordering whatever I wanted. At first, it was exciting, the kind of independence you read about but never truly experience until you're on your own in a quiet house. The first few hours were normal. I unpacked the groceries my mom had left, set up a couple of movies, and Max slept at my feet on the living room rug. Around 8, I decided to watch a horror movie, mostly because I thought it would be thrilling, but also because it would keep me alert in the empty house. The wind outside had picked up, rattling the windows ever so slightly, but I didn't think much of it. Houses in our neighborhood were all old, and the slightest gust would make a million little noises. Then, about an hour in, I heard something that didn't fit. A soft, shuffling sound like footsteps on the deck outside. I froze, telling myself it was probably just the wind, or maybe Max scratching at the door to go out. But the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. I paused the movie and went to the window, drawing the blinds carefully. The backyard was empty. The wind had died down, and the porch lights illuminated nothing but shadows. I laughed at myself for being paranoid, shaking my head. "It's fine," I muttered. Max growled low in his throat, his ears perked toward the sliding glass door. I crouched down to pet him, trying to calm both of us. Then I heard it again, the dragging sound like someone heavy walking across the wooden deck. I stood up too quickly, almost bumping the curtain rod. This time I could see a shadow through the frosted glass. It wasn't long, but it was enough to make my stomach drop. My heart was racing, pounding so loud I thought my parents might hear it over the phone if I called them. I reached for my phone, but realized it was still on the charger downstairs. That was when I noticed the front door. The deadbolt, usually double locked by my dad, was slightly turned. Not completely, but enough that a normal person would have noticed. I froze. Max started growling, louder now, pacing between the sliding door and the kitchen. Every instinct screamed to run, but my legs felt frozen. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a heavy flashlight from the emergency kit, and crept to the door. No one was there. The lock was untouched. The sliding door remained firmly shut. I tried calling my parents, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. No answer. I left voicemails, texted repeatedly, but nothing. By now, the wind had picked up again, slamming branches against the house. The lights flickered, once, twice, and then stabilized. I told myself it was all in my head, some combination of nerves, movie adrenaline, and the loneliness of an empty house. I tried to settle back on the couch, wrapping a blanket around myself and Max, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that I wasn't alone. The sensation was subtle at first, a tickle at the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. The hairs on my arms stood on end. Then I heard it again, soft, deliberate footsteps upstairs. My parents' bedroom, the guest room, the study, footsteps pacing back and forth. I didn't dare call out. Max's growling turned into barking, sharp and frantic, but I couldn't even figure out which door or window they were coming from. I grabbed a baseball bat from the hall closet. I didn't want to use it. I didn't want to escalate anything, but I felt trapped, exposed. I moved through the house slowly, checking each room. Empty. Nothing. I even checked the basement, a place I usually avoided because it was cold and smelled musty. Still, nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing. By now, the movie was long forgotten, the quiet of the house suffocating. I tried to convince myself it was just some prank, maybe a neighbor's kid, though no one had been outside. Maybe it was a raccoon or some animal, though the pacing upstairs didn't match any animal I'd ever heard. I decided to call my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Hanson. She was in her 70s, kind, and always cautious about neighborhood safety. Her voice on the phone was calm, soothing, and for a moment I almost felt relief. I explained what was happening, and she told me to lock every door and window, stay put, and call 911 if I felt unsafe. I thanked her, hung up, and checked the locks again. Everything was secure. Then I heard the voice, soft, just behind me, barely audible. I turned, swinging the bat in the direction of the sound. "Who's there?" I shouted. No response. Max barked frantically, tail stiff, hackles raised. I spun in circles, trying to locate the sound, when the kitchen door creaked open on its own. I knew I had closed it. My first thought was that the wind had caught it, but there was no wind in the kitchen. The silence was overwhelming, heavy. I edged closer, heart in my throat, and noticed something that made my stomach twist. On the kitchen floor, in the dim light from the hallway, there were muddy footprints. Large, uneven, the kind you'd expect from work boots or something similar. They led from the back door across the kitchen and stopped abruptly in the middle of the room. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. I backed out slowly, gripping the bat tighter. Max growled low, circling, every instinct telling him something was wrong. I considered calling the police again, but my phone was dead. Not out of battery, but dead. No signal, no dial tone. The footsteps upstairs started again, louder this time, deliberate, pacing outside my parents' bedroom. I realized then that the intruder wasn't just in the house. They were exploring, testing, watching. I could hear the floorboards creak under weight that wasn't mine, that wasn't Max's. I needed to escape. The front door was my best option. I crept to the living room, staying in the shadows, trying to stay quiet. That's when I saw it, a figure at the window, outside, staring in. Not moving, just standing. I froze, the bat slipping from my hands. The figure didn't move, didn't react when Max barked. Then it vanished, gone in an instant. Panic surged. I grabbed my coat and keys, thinking about running to a neighbor's house, but then I remembered the side window, the one that led directly to the backyard. It had no lock. If the person had entered from there, they could intercept me outside. I was trapped, caught between a dead battery phone, no one around, and a stranger in the house. I decided to hide. I ran to the laundry room, squeezed behind the dryer, and tried to control my breathing. Max followed, whining softly, his body pressed against mine. The footsteps upstairs stopped. Silence, except for the wind rattling the house. I stayed there for what felt like hours, maybe minutes. I couldn't tell. Then I heard the creak of the basement door. Slowly, deliberate. Someone was coming down. I didn't know why, what they wanted, or how they had gotten in unnoticed. My mind raced. If they found me, there was no way to fight back effectively. The bat had dropped too far to reach. My phone was useless. The basement light flicked on, not a flicker, but fully on, though I was sure the breaker was off. I could hear shuffling below, dragging sounds, whispers I couldn't understand. Max growled low, protective but not aggressive, more warning than attack. Then the voice again, clearer this time, whispering my name. "I see you." I screamed, my first real sound in hours, and bolted for the back door. It opened easily, as if no one had locked it. I ran into the backyard, barefoot, into the dark night, Max at my side. I didn't stop running until I reached the neighbor's yard. Mrs. Hanson opened her door, startled, and I burst inside, collapsing on her couch, sobbing and shaking. The police came within minutes, though it felt like hours. They searched the house thoroughly. Nothing. No signs of forced entry. The footprints, the broken locks, the shadow at the window. Gone. They took my statement, reassured me, and told me they'd patrol the area more frequently. My parents rushed home the next morning. They tried to comfort me, but the fear didn't leave. The house felt different, empty in a way it hadn't before. Weeks later, I learned there had been a string of similar incidents in the neighborhood. Houses broken into, nothing stolen, no evidence left behind. The police never caught anyone. The stories from neighbors described figures seen through windows, strange noises at night, doors left unlocked when they swore they had locked them. I moved out of that house the following year, but even years later, I remember the sound of the footsteps, the whisper of my name, and the way Max stood guard, sensing something I couldn't see. Sometimes when the wind rattles my current apartment's windows at night, I feel that same tension, that same fear. And I remember I wasn't imagining it. Someone or something had been there, inside my house, watching. Even now, I avoid being alone at home whenever possible. The memory doesn't fade. The shadowy figure, the voice, the footprints, everything about that night is burned into my mind. And I know deep down that whatever it wasn't done with me. Story the end. It was a late October Friday when my parents left for their weekend trip to visit my aunt upstate. I was 15, home alone for the first time since my little sister went off to college. Our house was in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio, the kind where everyone waves to everyone and doors are rarely locked. The thought of being completely alone thrilled me at first. I'd imagined a weekend of freedom, pizza delivered at midnight, scary movies blaring on the TV, the lights flickering just enough to feel cinematic. I didn't expect fear, real fear, to creep into the corners of my home. The evening started normal enough. I ate leftover macaroni and watched some late night sitcoms, feeling that mix of excitement and relief that comes with knowing no one will scold you for eating cereal for dinner. Around 10 p.m., a storm began rolling in. The wind howled down the street, rattling the trees and slapping the windows with sheets of rain. The lights flickered once, then came back on. I shrugged, thinking nothing of it. I went to the kitchen to grab a snack and noticed the back door slightly ajar. That didn't make sense. My parents always made sure I locked every door. My stomach tightened and I froze for a second, listening. The rain pounded against the windows, masking any small noises outside. My first thought was that I must have left it unlocked after taking in groceries earlier that day. But the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that I had closed it. Slowly, I walked over and pushed it fully shut, then locked it, double-checking the deadbolt. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling and went back to the living room. I plugged my phone into the charger and scrolled through social media, telling myself the fear was just in my head. Then I heard it, a faint creak, like someone stepping on the top stair of the staircase leading to the second floor. My heart skipped a beat. Must be the house settling, I whispered to myself. Old houses do that, right? The storm was making everything seem louder. I told myself I was being ridiculous, and to prove it, I went upstairs to check. Each step creaked under my weight, echoing through the house. The bedrooms were all empty. The bathroom was dark. The closet doors closed. Nothing. I laughed nervously, turning back toward the stairs, but halfway down, I froze. From the kitchen, a faint scratching noise started, like fingernails dragging across the floor. I grabbed the nearest object, a metal spatula, and crept down. The kitchen was empty. I could hear the rain battering the windows, the wind rattling the siding, but nothing else. I shook my head and muttered, "I'm losing it." I decided to call my friend Josh, hoping the sound of his voice would calm me. My phone rang, and as he answered, I started explaining the noises. Halfway through, the line went dead. I tried again. Nothing. A chill ran down my spine. Then I heard it. A soft whisper, barely audible over the storm, coming from the living room. "Hey!" My heart stopped. I spun around, spatula raised. The living room was dark, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning. Empty. I ran to the front door and peered out, but the street was empty, flooded by rain. I checked the back door, locked, as I remembered. I locked it again, shaking. I told myself maybe it was my imagination, stress from being alone combined with the storm. I tried to sleep, but every little sound, pipes groaning, the wind whistling, the creak of floorboards, felt amplified. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of breathing. Slow, deliberate, not mine. I sat up in bed, listening. It came again, from downstairs, followed by the sound of the front doorknob rattling. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my dad's old baseball bat from under my bed and crept toward the stairs. The knob rattled again, harder this time. I whispered for the intruder to leave, even though no one could hear me. The knob stopped. Silence. Then, just as I started to think maybe it had been nothing, I heard it, footsteps moving across the living room floor. Heavy, slow, deliberate. I backed into my room, locked the door, and called 911. The operator was calm, asked if anyone was inside with me. I whispered that I was alone. They told me to stay put and that officers were on their way. Minutes felt like hours. I could hear the footsteps pacing the living room now, then a chair scraping across the floor. I pressed myself against the door, gripping the bat, praying. Then the most chilling thing, a slow, deliberate drag of something heavy across the hallway floor, moving closer to my bedroom. I could feel the floor vibrate with each movement. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. Silence, except for the storm. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the bat. Then a soft whisper, unmistakably human, came from just outside my door. "I see you." I screamed into the phone at the 911 operator, who told me officers were 5 minutes away. 5 minutes felt like eternity. I could hear someone or something moving around outside my door, slow, deliberate, testing the knob. Then it stopped again. I don't know how I stayed so quiet, but I backed toward the closet, dragging my phone with me. I slid inside and closed the door. The footsteps resumed, circling my room. Then a shadow passed by the slightly cracked door. I could hear breathing, low and deliberate, close enough that it made my skin crawl. The knocking started next, slow at first, then urgent. I clutched my phone like a lifeline. "Please hurry," I whispered. The knocks became harder, more forceful, like someone was trying to break in. Finally, the sound of sirens pierced through the storm. The intruder froze, then bolted. I could hear the wet thuds of someone running across the street and into the dark. The police arrived moments later, guns drawn, flashlights cutting through the rain. I ran into the arms of one of the officers, shaking uncontrollably. They searched the house, finding muddy footprints all over the kitchen and living room. The back door had been slightly forced open, and a window on the first floor was ajar. They said someone had tried to break in while I was upstairs. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. In the weeks that followed, the thought of that night haunted me. Every little sound, the creak of the floor, the whisper of the wind, made me jump. My parents installed new locks and an alarm system, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the intruder had known the house, had known I would be alone. Months later, our neighbor told us about a man who had been spotted in the area around the same time, peering into houses, sometimes breaking in. He had been caught later, but the police never confirmed if it was him who had entered our home. I never saw him, never knew what he looked like. All I know is the way he moved, slow and deliberate, whispering my name. That image is burned into my memory. Even now, years later, whenever I'm alone in a house during a storm, I can't shake the fear. The memory of that night, the whispering, the dragging footsteps, the sense that someone was inside with me, lurks in the corners of my mind. I still sleep with the doors locked, the lights on, and a bat within reach, just in case. Some nights, I swear I can still hear faint whispers coming from empty rooms, and I can't tell if it's the wind or something else. After that night, I learned the hard way that home alone is never truly safe. Even in a quiet suburban neighborhood, even in a house you know like the back of your hand, there's always a chance that someone or something can slip past your defenses. I never told my parents how terrified I was that night because I didn't want them to worry, but the fear has never left me. The memory of the intruder's slow steps, the whispered words, and the knowledge that he could have been anyone still lingers in my mind, a constant reminder that safety is fragile and sometimes illusory. Years later, I moved out for college, and the memory of that night never faded. When I stayed in my dorm, I would lock the doors, check the windows, and sometimes hear noises that made me jump, not because I expected danger, but because my mind was trained to remember. I realized that fear can linger long after the event itself, shaping the way you move, sleep, and live. Sometimes I think about what could have happened if the police had been 5 minutes later. 5 minutes can mean the difference between life and death. I try not to dwell on it, but late at night, when the wind howls and the floor creaks, I remember the whisper, "I see you," and I feel that same prickling fear as if it just happened yesterday. I've shared this story with friends, but most of them laugh it off, saying I must have been imagining things. I don't care. I know what I heard. I know what I felt. And I know that for a brief, terrifying moment, I was not alone in my own home, and I came face to face with the darkest possibility. Someone had invaded my safe space, knew I was alone, and could have done anything. Since then, I've learned the importance of preparation, of vigilance, and of never underestimating the danger that can hide in familiar places. I keep my doors locked, alarms armed, and never underestimate the smallest sound in the dead of night. And sometimes, when the wind is strong and the shadows long, I still hear faint whispers in my mind, and I shiver, remembering the night I was home alone and someone, somewhere, had come close enough to touch the fear inside me. Story the end. It was one of those early autumn evenings in suburban Ohio when everything looked calm, almost deceptively peaceful. The kind of calm that made you forget the wind outside was beginning to pick up, rattling leaves against the windows and carrying the occasional hollow groan of the old trees lining the street. Emily, 16, had been looking forward to a quiet night at home alone. Her parents had left for a weekend getaway to visit relatives in Chicago, leaving her with the house, the dog, and her laptop. Her younger brother was at a friend's house for a sleepover, so it was just her, the dog, and what she assumed would be an uneventful Friday night. She had spent the afternoon running errands, picking up groceries, stopping by the library, and even grabbing a few Halloween decorations she'd found on sale. The house smelled faintly of pumpkin spice and cinnamon, a combination she hadn't intended but appreciated nonetheless. She set the bags down in the kitchen, turned on a podcast, and began putting things away. Shadowed corners of the house looked darker than usual in the fading light, but Emily shrugged it off, telling herself it was just the angle of the sun. By the time evening arrived, she had settled into the living room with her laptop on her lap, scrolling through social media. Her dog, Max, a lanky golden retriever, lay sprawled at her feet. The house felt unusually quiet. Usually, her parents' presence, even just the sound of them moving around, created a sense of background noise. Tonight, there was only the occasional creak from the upstairs floorboards. Emily didn't think much of it. Old houses creak, especially in the autumn when temperatures drop and wood contracts. About an hour after sunset, she heard the first strange sound that made her pause. It was soft, almost imperceptible, like a knock, or maybe a tap coming from the kitchen. Emily's first thought was that Max had knocked something over. She glanced down at him. He was still curled up, asleep, breathing evenly. Shrugging, she decided it had been nothing and went back to her screen. But then the sound came again, clearer this time. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the kitchen window. Her stomach tightened. She got up and tiptoed toward the window, her mind racing through rational explanations, branches hitting the glass, a stray animal outside. But as she peered through the blinds, she saw nothing. The yard was empty except for a swing swaying slightly in the breeze, the streetlight casting a dim glow across the lawn. Emily exhaled slowly, telling herself she was overreacting. She returned to the living room, though she felt a prickling unease crawling up her spine. Max stirred, his ears perking up, growling low in his throat. Emily froze. The growl was directed at the front door. She slowly walked toward it, up the aisle, checking the locks. Everything was secured. The fear in her chest was growing, a tight knot of anxiety she couldn't shake. She tried to distract herself by texting her friend, asking if they wanted to FaceTime, but her phone refused to send the message. The screen blinked. No service. Her house had full bars earlier that day. Then she heard it. A footstep. Slow, deliberate, coming from the hallway that led to the bedrooms. Emily froze mid-step. Max barked sharply, his tail stiff. The sound stopped for a moment, then a second step echoed. She ran to the kitchen, grabbed a chef's knife from the block, and tried to call her parents, but there was no dial tone. Panic started to rise. The logical part of her mind told her that maybe someone had broken in while her parents were away. She looked around the living room for something to barricade the door with. She shoved the coffee table against it and whispered for Max to stay quiet. She could hear the sound of movement upstairs, footsteps pacing slowly across the floor above. Emily's mind raced. Should she try to hide? Should she run? She knew she couldn't leave. The street was deserted. The sound of breathing filled the hallway. Not Max's. Not her own. Heavy, slow, deliberate breathing. Emily pressed herself against the wall, knife trembling in her hand. The lights flickered once, then went out completely. Total darkness. Max whimpered at her feet, tail tucked. She could hear the breathing closer now, moving down the hallway toward her. Suddenly, the doorknob rattled. Emily's heart slammed into her ribs. She held her breath, gripping the knife tighter. The knob turned slowly, deliberately. Then it stopped. Silence, except for her own shaky breathing and Max whining. She didn't dare move. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Time lost all meaning. Then out of the black, a soft whisper. "I know you're here." Emily froze. Her voice caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to run, but the hallway felt impossibly long, the darkness suffocating. Max growled louder, hackles raised. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Don't hide. I can see you." Something heavy hit the living room wall next to her, making the coffee table wobble. She swung the knife blindly toward the sound. The object, the shadow of it, retreated instantly. Emily's heart raced, adrenaline surged. She ran to the back door, yanking it open, planning to escape into the yard, but it was jammed, locked from the outside. Her stomach dropped. Whoever or whatever was inside knew she was there. She backed up, bumping into the couch. The whisper came again, right behind her now. "Nice little home you have. Too bad it's empty." Emily turned, knife raised, but saw nothing. The darkness seemed to press against her, almost solid. Max barked violently, charging into the hallway. A shadow flickered past the doorway. Emily screamed. She ran upstairs, 2 steps at a time, and slammed herself into her bedroom, locking the door. Max was behind her, pacing, growling, scratching at the door. Emily pressed her back against it, listening. Footsteps upstairs stopped, replaced by the faintest sound of dragging across the floor. Something was moving around her house, above her, outside the range of sight, but impossibly close. She grabbed her phone again. Still no signal. She ran to her closet and pulled out a flashlight, clicking it on. The beam cut across the room, landing on her window. Something was standing outside. She couldn't see a face, but the outline of a figure was clear. Tall, thin, completely still. She screamed, turning away, and the figure was gone when she looked back. Emily backed into the corner, trying to remember everything her parents had taught her about home safety. Don't hide in obvious places. Don't confront the intruder. Call for help. She tried yelling for help, screaming into the night, but the walls swallowed her voice. It was as if the house itself had gone deaf. The sound of the front door opening downstairs froze her blood. Footsteps on the stairs followed. Slow, deliberate. She held her breath, counting each step. 1, 2, 3, closer, until the doorknob rattled. Emily's hands were shaking uncontrollably. The door handle turned. Slowly. The door opened, just enough for a shadow to slip through. Max lunged, barking fiercely. The shadow stumbled, then froze, as if caught off guard. Emily raised the knife. "Stay back," she screamed. The figure didn't move for a second, then vanished. She wasn't sure if it had run away or simply disappeared into the darkness. Emily didn't sleep that night. She stayed awake in the closet, flashlight in hand, listening. Every creak, every rustle of the wind made her heart race. Dawn didn't bring relief. When her parents returned the next evening, they found her huddled in the closet, disheveled, pale, and trembling. Max stayed close to her, growling at every shadow. The police investigated, but no signs of forced entry were found. No prints, no fingerprints, no indication that anyone had been inside. Emily knew what she had heard, what she had felt, but the official report concluded it must have been an elaborate hoax, or maybe a figment of her imagination under stress. And she never spoke about it again. Years later, she would drive past that house, still standing in the quiet Ohio suburb, and feel a chill down her spine. Something had been there that night. Something had walked through her home, unseen, unheard, except by her and Max. And though it never returned, she knew it could. Any night she was alone, the house itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Even now, she would sometimes wake at night, convinced she heard a whisper, faint and deliberate, coming from somewhere just out of sight. "I know you're here." Story the end. It was a Friday evening in early November when everything began. I had just turned 17, and my parents had left for a weekend getaway, leaving me alone in the house for the first time without any siblings or neighbors around. The house was a modest 2-story suburban home in a quiet neighborhood in Ohio, the kind of place where you could hear the wind whistling through the trees and only the occasional car passing by. My parents had been excited to have some alone time, and I was ecstatic at the thought of spending the weekend free of rules, able to watch whatever I wanted, eat junk food, and play video games until dawn. I didn't think anything could possibly go wrong. The first evening passed normally. I made myself a quick dinner, watched a couple of movies, and even called my best friend to brag about my freedom. By 10 o'clock, though, I started noticing little things. At first, it was subtle, the faint creaking of the stairs, the soft rustling in the living room, even when I was sure I'd locked the doors. I shrugged it off, blaming the house settling or the wind. I had lived there all my life, and creaks were normal. Around midnight, I was in my room playing a video game when I heard a noise downstairs. It wasn't loud, just a faint thump, like something heavy hitting the floor. I froze, listening. My house had an old wooden floor that creaked under my weight, so I thought maybe it was nothing. But then it came again, a deliberate thump followed by a dragging sound. My heart started racing. I muted the game and pressed my ear against the floor, trying to hear more clearly. Then it hit me. It wasn't coming from the floorboards. It was coming from the living room. I slowly crept to the top of the stairs, peering down. The lights were off, and the living room was dark, except for the faint glow of the streetlight filtering through the curtains. At first, I thought maybe I had imagined it, but then I saw it, a shadow moving across the floor. Not like one from the curtains, but a heavy, slow shadow. I couldn't make out a shape, just movement. I froze. I wanted to call my parents, but I didn't want to sound crazy. I debated calling 911, but my mind raced through worst-case scenarios. I grabbed my phone anyway and dialed, but the second I did, the shadow disappeared. The line went dead. My stomach dropped. I tiptoed downstairs, keeping as quiet as possible. The living room was empty. Nothing had been disturbed, no broken objects, no signs of forced entry. I told myself it was probably a cat. My neighbor's cat sometimes wandered in when doors were left open, but the dragging sound? That wasn't an animal. I decided to lock every door and window again, double-checking them. Everything seemed secure. I thought about turning on every light in the house, but my instincts screamed at me not to. I went back upstairs, keeping my bedroom door locked. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that I was just imagining things because I was alone. About an hour later, I fell asleep on my bed, the TV still on for background noise. I woke suddenly to the sound of the front door handle rattling. I bolted upright, heart in my throat. The door was locked, but someone was trying to get in. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone. I called 911, whispering frantically into the receiver. "There's someone at my door. Please, please send someone." The dispatcher asked me to stay on the line, to remain calm. I crouched by my bedroom door, listening. The rattling stopped. For a few minutes it was silent. Then I heard soft footsteps upstairs. Not running, not clumsy, just deliberate footsteps, pacing. My blood ran cold. My room was at the opposite end of the house, yet it sounded like the person was walking directly above me. I tried calling my neighbor, an older man who lived 2 doors down, but he didn't answer. I didn't dare leave my room. The footsteps continued, slow and methodical, circling the upstairs hallway. Then they stopped. Complete silence. I thought maybe the intruder had left. My relief was short-lived. A shadow passed under my door. I saw it clearly, the shape of a person standing just outside my bedroom. My first instinct was to scream, but I swallowed it. I grabbed a baseball bat from my closet and flung the door open, swinging wildly into the hallway. Nothing. Just the empty hallway. Dark and quiet. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, bat raised, eyes darting. No one. I ran back into my room and locked the door again, trying to convince myself it was a hallucination, that maybe I had fallen asleep and dreamed it. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a dream. I had been too awake, too aware. Around 3 a.m., I finally mustered the courage to peek out of my window. The street was empty. No one in sight. But then I saw it. Footprints in the light dusting of frost on our front porch. They were small, like a teenager's or someone light on their feet, and they led directly from the front yard to the side of the house and disappeared. My stomach dropped. Whoever it was had been inside. I spent the rest of the night in my room, bat in hand, huddled under my blanket. I didn't sleep. I listened to every creak, every groan of the house, expecting it to happen again. By morning, the sun rose and the world seemed normal again. I thought maybe I had survived my first night alone and that whatever it was had left. That weekend passed without incident, and when my parents returned, I tried to explain what had happened. They were skeptical at first. My dad jokingly said I must have been watching too many horror movies. But when I showed them the footprints, their expressions changed. My mom insisted it had to be a neighbor's kid, a prank or something. I wasn't convinced. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. I started noticing objects slightly moved, the fridge door left open when I was sure I had closed it, and doors that I remembered locking somehow ajar. At first, I thought I was just forgetting, but the sense of being watched grew stronger. I would feel eyes on me even in my own room, and at night I heard the softest whispers, indistinguishable words just on the edge of hearing. One night, about 2 weeks after my parents' trip, I was in the kitchen making a snack. The back door to the house creaked open behind me. I spun around. No one. I ran to the door. It was locked, bolted even, but the bolt had been slid back. Someone had been inside while I was standing just feet away. My heart raced so fast I thought it would burst. I called my parents, shaking. They tried to reassure me, but their voices sounded distant, almost hollow. The next day, I called the police and filed a report. They came, checked the house, found nothing unusual, and told me to keep doors locked. They didn't seem to take it seriously, assuming maybe I was anxious being home alone. I wanted to argue, but I knew they wouldn't understand. Then the things started appearing. Notes, crudely written on scraps of paper, left in places I would find them. The first one said, "I see you." I found it tucked under the TV remote. The second one said, "You can't hide," left inside the cereal box. I stopped opening mail. I stopped using the front door. Every time I thought I was safe, another note would appear. I started sleeping with the lights on, doors locked, bat in hand, and phone beside me. I stopped inviting friends over. My parents left for work and errands, and I felt more and more isolated. I knew someone was inside my house, but I couldn't prove it. Security cameras were installed, but footage never showed anyone, just empty rooms. Yet the notes kept coming. The whispers at night continued. One night around midnight, I woke to the sound of breathing. Soft, slow, deliberate. I froze. My room door was locked, but the knob rattled. Whoever it was tried to open it. I whispered into the phone, calling 911. The dispatcher stayed on the line as the rattling grew more insistent. I gripped the bat, my knuckles white, and held my breath. Then, silence. I didn't move. After what felt like an eternity, I crept to the door and peeked out. The hallway was empty. But on the floor at the foot of the stairs was another note. "I'm closer than you think." I left the house that night. I stayed at a friend's place, refused to return until my parents were home with me. My parents finally believed me when a neighbor admitted seeing a stranger lurking around the property multiple times during the previous weeks. The police increased patrols, but no one was ever caught. The house felt permanently tainted, every creak and shadow a reminder. Years later, I still live in that house. The notes stopped eventually, but the feeling never did. Some nights, I still hear the footsteps, the soft whispers, or the rustling in the dark. I've learned to lock doors, triple-check windows, and never, ever feel completely safe in my own home. I sometimes wonder if the intruder ever really left, or if they're still just watching, waiting, patient, and silent. The sense of being home alone has never felt safe again. Even now, if I stay up too late, I can hear it, the faint dragging of something across the living room floor, the soft sigh of someone moving in the dark. And I know, without a doubt, that I am never truly alone. Story the end. It was a Thursday evening in late November, the kind of night where the wind howled through the bare branches outside and the smell of rain lingered in the air. I was 16 at the time, living with my parents in a 2-story suburban home in Ohio. My dad had to leave for a work trip last minute, and my mom was visiting her sister across state lines for the week, leaving me alone for the first time in the house. I had mixed feelings. On one hand, freedom was exhilarating. On the other, an uneasy knot formed in my stomach as the evening drew near. I had always been a little sensitive to sounds, to shadows, the kind of kid who could never sleep if the wind rattled the windows. Being home alone amplified all of that. The first few hours were uneventful. I made myself a microwave dinner, plopped onto the couch, and turned on some mindless TV. The rain had started lightly at first, tapping against the windows like a nervous hand. By nightfall, it had escalated to a relentless downpour. I remember watching the shadows of the trees twisting across the living room walls, stretching unnaturally as the wind tossed them around. I tried to shake the unease, telling myself it was just a normal storm. Still, the house felt different, too quiet, too still. Except for the occasional creaks of settling wood, it was eerily silent. Around 9 o'clock, I decided to call my friend Lisa. She was my go-to when I felt jittery. Her voice over the phone was comforting, almost like a tether to the outside world. We chatted about school, homework, and the upcoming Thanksgiving break. I glanced out the window mid-conversation, watching the streaks of rain run down the glass, distorting the dim streetlights. That's when I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the yard, barely visible behind the blur of water. I froze, squinting. My heart stuttered. It was too dark to see clearly, but the outline of a man, tall and broad-shouldered, was unmistakable. He wasn't moving much, just standing there, staring at the house. I swallowed hard and quickly told Lisa I had to go, claiming my phone battery was dying, though it wasn't. As soon as I hung up, my instincts screamed at me to call 911, but I hesitated. What if I was overreacting? What if it was a neighbor or someone lost? I peered out again. The figure was gone. I tried to shake it off, but every creak, every gust of wind made my anxiety spike. I locked all the doors and windows, double-checked the deadbolt, and even the sliding glass door in the back. The storm rattled the house violently now, gusts shaking the old wooden panels, and the lights flickered. I went into the kitchen to grab a snack and caught movement in the corner of my eye. From the corner of the room, I saw a shadow slide across the floor in the hallway upstairs. I froze again, my throat tight. No one was supposed to be home. My parents were gone. I told myself it was a trick of the shadows, a play of the lightning through the curtains, but the instinctive, primal fear that rose in me told a different story. I decided to lock myself in my bedroom. I dragged my laptop and my phone into the room, plugged in both, and sat on the bed, trying to convince myself I was safe. That's when it started. The footsteps. Slow, deliberate, from the floor above. Our house had always been creaky, sure, but these weren't normal house noises. They had a weight to them, a rhythm that mimicked someone pacing, pausing, pacing again. I grabbed a baseball bat from under my bed, every muscle tense, heart hammering. The sound moved from the hallway to the stairwell. My door shook slightly, as if someone was testing it. I whispered into my phone, recording a video for my own evidence, telling myself to keep calm, though my voice trembled. I called 911 at last, whispering to the dispatcher, trying not to reveal my exact fear. I explained that I thought someone was in my house. The dispatcher told me to stay quiet, to stay put, and that officers were on their way. My eyes darted to the window, half expecting to see the same figure from earlier, watching. The wind howled, rain slammed against the siding, and the lights flickered again. Then, without warning, the upstairs light, the hall light, turned on. It was a weak, flickering glow, and my blood ran cold. My parents had left that light off. Nobody should be up there. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the power surge caused it. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. The footsteps started again, faster this time, almost marching. The doorknob rattled violently. I pressed myself against the far wall, bat in hand, willing it to be a dream. The sound of glass breaking made me jump. Something shattered upstairs. My phone slipped from my hand in shock. I scrambled to pick it up, whispers of the dispatcher barely audible as they asked me to stay calm. I peeked at the door for a moment, and that's when I saw it. The shadow of someone moving across the crack under the door. Not a trick of the light this time. A human silhouette. My stomach dropped. I swung the bat at the door as hard as I could. The impact echoed through the house, followed by silence. Then, faintly, the sound of slow footsteps retreating upstairs. The 911 dispatcher told me officers were about 5 minutes out. Those 5 minutes felt eternal. I sat in my room, holding the bat, listening to the storm and every little creak. Then something even worse, soft, deliberate scratching at my bedroom window. I froze, realizing the curtains hadn't moved. No wind could explain this. My hands shook uncontrollably. I whispered to the dispatcher, explaining what was happening. They told me to stay down, to hide if I could, and that officers were very close. I looked out the small sliver of window I dared to uncover. A man, soaked by the rain, staring straight at me. His face was partially obscured by a hood, but his eyes glinted unnaturally in the faint streetlight. He crouched slightly, almost crawling along the wall to avoid full view, then disappeared from my line of sight. I couldn't breathe. The storm seemed to fade behind the pounding of my heart in my ears. Every instinct screamed to run, but I knew there was nowhere to go safely. Then the sound of glass shattering again, this time downstairs in the living room. The dispatcher asked if I could lock myself in a closet or bathroom. I crawled into my bathroom, closing the door and pulling a towel underneath to block the gap. My phone pressed to my ear, tears streaming down my face. The footsteps grew fainter, as if the intruder was moving around, searching for me. I held my breath when I heard him downstairs, muttering something I couldn't catch, then heavier stomps as he descended the stairs slowly. The house seemed impossibly large at that moment, echoing every sound. Moments later, headlights flashed through the windows. The officers had arrived. I opened the door cautiously, shouting for help. The man bolted through the back door as they got inside, soaking wet and leaving streaks of mud across the floor. They gave chase, but never caught him. They found evidence he had tried to enter other homes in the neighborhood earlier, breaking windows and doors. The storm had covered most of his tracks. They reassured me I was safe now, but I could still feel the weight of him in the house, even though he was gone. In the following days, my parents returned, and life tried to regain its normal rhythm, but something had shifted. I couldn't sleep in my own bed for weeks. Every shadow in the hallway made my heart race. The police never caught the man, though they kept the investigation open. Our neighborhood installed security cameras, and I learned later that footage captured him lurking around other houses that same night, always watching, always waiting for someone to be alone. The footage from my house showed him peering through the windows for almost an hour before the officers arrived. It's hard to describe the sense of violation I felt, knowing someone had been inside my home, in my space, while I was alone. Friends tried to comfort me, saying it could have been worse, that I was lucky nothing happened. But luck felt thin, fragile. I never stayed home alone again, not for a single night, until I moved out of that house years later. Even then, the memory haunted me. I sometimes wake in the middle of the night, certain I hear footsteps in the hallway or the scrape of a shadow against the walls. And I know, in some dark corner of my mind, that he could have been anyone, anywhere, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. Years later, I would drive past my old house. The street looked the same, ordinary, peaceful. But as I glanced up at the windows, I couldn't shake the memory of that night. The storm, the footsteps, the figure outside the window. Every detail was etched into my mind, a permanent record of fear. And for a long time, I realized that the true horror of being home alone wasn't just the possibility of an intruder. It was the realization that safety is never guaranteed, that darkness doesn't care about age or preparedness or locked doors. It simply exists, and sometimes it finds its way in. Story the end. It was a quiet Thursday evening in early November when everything felt ordinary, and yet that was exactly the moment everything changed. The autumn air was crisp, and the sun had dipped below the horizon hours ago, leaving a dim orange glow on the horizon that quickly faded to dark. The streets in my suburban neighborhood were deserted, the occasional rustle of leaves or distant car breaking the silence. I had been home alone for the first time in months. My parents had left for a weekend trip to visit relatives, and I was tasked with looking after the house. I was 16, and the freedom was intoxicating. I thought nothing could go wrong. The evening started normally enough. I cooked myself a simple dinner in the kitchen, a couple of slices of frozen pizza, microwaved, nothing fancy. The house smelled warm and familiar. I set up my laptop on the living room couch to watch a movie, the glow of the screen painting my face in pale light. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees in the yard, causing shadows to dance across the walls. I paused the movie for a moment, listening. There was nothing unusual, just the creak of the house settling and the occasional thump of a branch against the window. I told myself I was imagining things. Around 9:30 p.m., I heard it. A faint scratching sound coming from the back door. It was slow, deliberate, almost cautious. My stomach dropped. I froze and held my breath, listening. It stopped. I told myself it was probably just a stray animal. My parents had a habit of leaving the back door slightly ajar when they went out to air out the kitchen, and perhaps the wind had moved it just enough for it to brush against the frame. I tried to shake it off and returned to the movie. About 15 minutes later, the scratching returned, louder this time, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of footsteps pacing just outside the door. My heart started racing, and I instinctively grabbed the phone to call my parents. The line was dead. I tried the cell phone, but my battery was low and the signal was weak. Panic started to set in. I turned off the lights and crept to the window, trying to get a look at what was out there. The backyard was dark, the swing set barely visible in the dim moonlight. Nothing moved, nothing seemed out of place, yet the sound persisted, scratching, pacing, then silence again. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a large knife from the block, and cautiously approached the back door. My hands were shaking, my breath rapid. The door was locked, and I double-checked it, bolting it tightly. Then I remembered the motion sensor lights outside. I turned them on, flooding the backyard with harsh white light. The shadows retreated, and for a moment it seemed empty. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe a raccoon, maybe a neighborhood kid playing a prank. I tried to distract myself by finishing my movie, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps following me, Every gust of wind against the windows sounded like someone breathing close. I tried calling a friend to come over, but no one answered. My parents were hours away, unreachable. The fear was building, gnawing at me in the silence. Around 11 p.m., I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a slow, deliberate knock right on the front door. 3 sharp knocks, then a pause, then 3 more. I froze, unable to move, staring at the door. I couldn't make sense of it. We had a peephole, but I didn't dare approach it. Whoever was outside, I thought, knew I was home alone. I decided to call the police. My hands were trembling as I dialed, whispering my address and situation. The dispatcher's voice was calm but serious, asking if I could see anyone outside. I shook my head, explaining the scratching, the pacing, the knocking. She assured me officers were on the way and advised me to stay inside, lock all doors and windows, and stay on the line. I moved to the living room, locked the door from the inside, and tried to remain as quiet as possible. The minutes dragged on, each second an eternity. Then I heard it again, this time not at the doors but from the basement. Slow, heavy footsteps moving deliberately across the concrete floor. My house had always creaked, yes, but this was different. This was heavier, deliberate. Someone was downstairs. I told the dispatcher, my voice shaking, and she stayed on the line, giving instructions. I took a deep breath and inched toward the basement door. I could see the faint light from the hallway reflecting off the top of the basement steps. My parents had always left the basement door locked, but I had never checked it. To my horror, the door was ajar. Slowly, I reached for the knob, trying not to make a sound. As I pushed it open just enough to peek inside, a figure moved in the shadows, hunched over, almost gliding across the floor. My blood ran cold. I could hear breathing, heavy and deliberate, echoing off the concrete walls. I stumbled back, tripping over a rug, and the figure froze as if it had been waiting for that sound. Then it moved, faster now, heading toward the stairs. I ran back to the living room, the dispatcher still on the line. My words jumbled as I tried to explain what I saw. Then I heard it, a whisper, so close to the door I could feel the vibration of the words through the wood. I know you're alone. I dropped the phone and bolted to my bedroom, locking the door, barricading it with the dresser. I could hear the front door creak open, then slam shut. Footsteps moved from the front to the back, then to the side of the house, circling, waiting. I called 911 again, whispering frantically, and the dispatcher assured me the officers were nearby, that help was almost there. The figure didn't enter my room, but I could hear it pacing outside, sometimes stopping to lean against the door, breathing heavily. Time became a blur, minutes felt like hours. I stayed as quiet as possible, clutching the knife, listening to every sound. Then the sound changed. A faint scratching on my bedroom window, slow and deliberate. My window was locked, but the thought of someone looking in made my stomach churn. I couldn't look. I didn't dare move. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Suddenly, lights from the street flashed through the blinds, police headlights. I ran to the window, waving frantically, tears streaming down my face. The figure outside bolted immediately, disappearing into the shadows. Within seconds, officers were at the door, guns drawn. I opened it, shaking uncontrollably, explaining everything in broken words. They searched the house thoroughly. The back door had scratches along the frame, consistent with a crowbar or similar tool. The basement had signs of forced entry, muddy footprints that led in from a broken window in the back. They assured me I was lucky nothing worse happened, that the intruder had fled when the police arrived. After they left, I sat in my bedroom for hours, too afraid to move. I replayed every detail in my mind. The shadow in the basement, the whisper at the door, the circling footsteps. Even now, weeks later, I can't drive past that neighborhood without a sense of dread. I know he was out there, watching, waiting. I'll never forget the sound of that whisper, and I'll never forget the feeling of being utterly, completely alone in my own home. Story the end.